So this happened a little over 2 years ago now. It was 2017, and I had just started a new job at a motel. It was low pay, but I needed an office job. One of my friends, John, got me this job. For a few days, I did training with the owner in the mornings. For 2 nights, John trained me. Our job was the 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. shift, nothing exciting, just checking guests in and doing paperwork. My boss, or the owner, went away with his wife on vacation for a week, which contributed to the swift training I had to endure. So it was my first night alone on the night shift. There was a monitor with security cameras around the motel's property and large glass windows all around the office building with a glass door. There was no night window like most motels have. It was fairly early in the night, at about 1 a.m. I was just doing my normal check-in paperwork when a man walked in and asked if we had any rooms available. Usually, if someone sketchy came in, my boss had me lie and say no. But he seemed normal at the moment, so without hesitation, I said yes. I began creating the reservation on the computer when I noticed he started swatting the air and making spitting noises as if he was being surrounded by flies. I tried to ignore it. As far as I was concerned, it wasn't my business, so I tried to check him into the room as quickly as possible. I gave him his key, and he was on his way. At this point in time, I could be described as very timid. I had a lot going on in my personal life, so I hope you can all understand my reaction to what happens next. The man came back from his room and slammed his hand on the glass door, causing me to jump, absolutely frightened. I looked up to see him just staring at me. He cracked the door and put his head through and said, "I can't get into my room. Why won't you let me into my room?" And my only defense is trying to be helpful, so I replied, "Maybe there's something wrong with your key. Let me give you another one." The look he had in his eyes was inexplicable. I felt like I was in absolute danger. I handed him his new key, and he went back to his room. I tried texting John because he's the one who trained me, though it was the middle of the night and he was asleep. I needed some guidance. With no reply from John, I noticed the man trudging down the stairs to come back. I went into absolute panic mode. I ran into the back office, locked the door, and pulled out my pocket knife. It's important to keep protection when working at night. I heard the man in the office yelling, "Hello? Hello? Why won't you let me into my room? Do you not like me?" Being an absolute idiot and not standing my ground or just calling the police when I was feeling scared, I decided to take the situation on alone. I replied, "I'm just on the phone. I'll be right out." I then started calling John over and over for help. No answer. I decided to take a few breaths and then step out of the office. The man was not there. He was in the bathroom. I started hearing him talking to himself angrily, saying, "Kill her, kill her." My heart sank. Still being an idiot and not calling the police, he came out, and I said, "Your key was broken. I'm sorry. Let me escort you to your room." He agreed. Thankfully, I was wearing a long-sleeved sweater, so with my arms down, I was able to hide my knife in my hand while holding it. I began to walk outside, and he seemed insistent on walking behind me. We began making our way to the staircase and up towards his room. I was sweating from how nervous I was, continuously looking behind me to make sure he wasn't going to make a move. He stopped at a room, and I stopped at his room a few doors down. I smiled and said, "Oh, that's the wrong room. This is your room," as it was clearly said on the door. This whole time, he was going to someone else's room and trying to open the door. After letting him into his room, I quickly ran back to the office and locked the door. I found out there was a lone woman staying in the other room he was trying to get into. The next guest I checked in was a police officer from a few towns over. I felt bad for confiding in him about the guy, but he seemed willing to keep an eye and ear out. The next night, the man came back, but I had the doors locked and told him we were all booked up. I explained to my boss what happened when he got back from vacation. However, he didn't take it very seriously. I continued to work there on the night shift for the next year, where many other strange encounters happened, but this was one of the worst. This happened back when I was in college. Spring break had just ended, and I was driving from my parents' house back to my college dorm. The drive itself was about 3 hours. There were a few small towns on the way, but other than that, it was pretty much just endless fields. I started my drive late, around 10:30 p.m. I was still making my way out of the town my parents lived in when I saw a hitchhiker walking on the side of the road. He was a tall, skinny guy carrying a duffel bag. As I got closer, he stuck out his thumb. I honestly felt really bad for the guy, and seeing as he was walking in the same direction I was going, I rolled down my window and asked if he wanted a ride. He named a nearby town and asked if I was going in that direction. I was, so I told him yes and unlocked the door. He got in the front seat, and I realized right away that he was a lot older than I thought, like, at least in his 40s. He kept to himself for a good part of the ride, which I actually didn't mind. I had the radio on, so it wasn't just awkward silence or anything. It wasn't until around 20 minutes into the drive with the guy that I started to think I made a mistake. The guy started clutching his stomach while groaning and complaining that he didn't feel well. He pretty much just hunched himself in the passenger seat, swaying back and forth. I told him to feel free to open up his window for some fresh air, but he never ended up doing it. To say I felt uncomfortable would be an understatement. Like, don't get me wrong, I understand if the dude wasn't feeling well, but here I am driving while just next to me is this guy groaning and swaying back and forth. There weren't really any towns or rest areas nearby. I didn't want to just tell the guy to get out and completely strand him in the middle of nowhere, so I kind of just sat there, trying to focus on the radio. This went on for another 15 minutes when the guy said, "Dude, I really don't feel good. Can you take the third next exit?" This caught me off guard. Not the part about wanting to stop, I was more so expecting him to say that at some point, but the part about the exit. The guy specifically said, "the third next exit." I remember those being his exact words. In the moment, I obviously thought it was weird. If I myself were sick, I would be much quicker to want to just pull onto the side of the road or at least take the very next exit. I asked the guy if he just wanted me to pull to the side of the road real quick, but he sternly told me no. This should have been a clear red flag, but I ultimately reasoned that the specific exit he wanted me to take must have had a rest area I was unaware of, so I agreed. A few minutes later, I took the exit, but absolutely nowhere in sight was any kind of rest area. I started pulling to the side of the road when the guy said, "No, keep going. We should go down a bit further." Again, this should have been a red flag I picked up on, but I did what he said. Eventually, he told me to stop. He got out and, within seconds, disappeared into the darkness. I waited for the guy to come back for a few minutes when I saw 5 hooded figures walking towards my vehicle, only revealed by the light of my headlights. They were clearly carrying weapons and now charging towards my vehicle. I threw the car in drive and started darting in the other direction, but they actually started shooting at me. From what I recall, 5 gunshots were fired, 2 of which hit the back of my car. Even still, I was able to get out of there. I didn't stop the rest of the way back. I did call the police and report it, but I never got any follow-up. When I made it back to my dorm, I found the bullet holes in the back of my car. I think it's worth noting that one of them was only a couple of inches from my tire, which makes me think whoever was shooting was aiming for the tires, but I'll never be able to know for sure. I don't fully know the motives of that hitchhiker that night, but at least to me, it's obvious he intentionally lured me into that specific spot, which, might I remind you, was nowhere near any type of civilization. I have since never picked up another hitchhiker. This past New Year's Eve, I went away for the night with my 2 best friends and one of their moms. I was home for the holidays from college, and my friend Yarezi invited me to go to Palm Springs to celebrate New Year's with her mom and our friend Nadia. I didn't have any other plans, so I decided to go with them. We went to a cool city about an hour from where we live that is big on shopping and resorts. We planned to have a pretty calm night, watch the ball drop at a block party downtown, and have a few drinks at the bar. Since we're on the West Coast, the ball drop is at 9:30, so at around 8:30, we ventured from our hotel, walking to the block party about a mile away. On the way, we passed by a very lively bar. We decided to stop by and we spent 15 minutes dancing, but we didn't get any drinks. It was a gay bar, and Yarezi and Nadia, being gay, were stoked on it and wanted to come back after the ball drop, even though it was about 90% men there. We continued on to the block party to get some dinner and a glass of champagne. The ball finally dropped and they had a DJ, so we spent about an hour there just dancing. After we got tired of it, we decided to head back to the bar and hang out there until midnight. Once we got there, Yareza's mom paid for a drink for each of us, but left soon after that because she was tired. It's about 10:30 at this point, and Yarezi, Nadia, and I are enjoying our drinks and having fun dancing. Nadia tried some of my drinks since it was one she hadn't had before. I constantly have my guard up when drinking in public, and I felt safe at this bar because it was 90% gay men who I thought would not have an interest in me. I went back to the bar to get a second drink, and that's the last thing I remember. The rest I've gathered from Yarezi and Nadia. Almost immediately after getting my second drink, I asked Nadia to go to the bathroom with me because I wasn't feeling well, even though I was completely fine 10 minutes before. Once in the bathroom, I just collapsed on the floor and was almost unresponsive. Nadia, now worried, somehow dragged my lifeless body out to where Yarezi was waiting for us. Security, seeing my condition and assuming I was wasted, asked us to leave. Yarezi and Nadia decided to take me back to the hotel about half a mile away. By this point, I was unconscious, and there were barely sounds escaping from my mouth. They saw someone leave the bar at the same time as us who was walking near us, but they were preoccupied with trying to keep my lifeless body off the ground. At one point, I threw up all over myself, them, and the sidewalk. The next part of the story we had to get from Yarezi because Nadia doesn't have much memory of this. Still struggling to carry me, the man they saw leave the bar approached them. He was hitting on Nadia, trying to get her to grab a drink with him. She was very agitated and told him to leave, saying her friend needed help right now. He didn't take no for an answer and continued to follow us down the street, asking if we wanted to get drinks with him and if he could help carry me and such. A middle-aged woman witnessing this came up and told the man off, saying something along the lines of, "Stop harassing these young women or I'm going to call the police." Thankfully, he left after that. Next, by some miracle, an EMT and his wife, enjoying the holiday, ran into us on the street. He checked me out to make sure something wasn't majorly wrong and then carried me the rest of the way to my motel and into the room since my friends could barely hold me up. They thanked him profusely, and him and his wife left. This is where Nadio's memory kicks back in a little bit. 5 minutes later, they get a knock on the door, and it's the EMT and his wife again. They came to let us know that a man followed us to the hotel, and they just saw him hop the gate and start to make his way to our room. My friends called hotel security, but they were unable to find him. My friends didn't get a glimpse of him, but I'm sure it was the same man from earlier. I spent the rest of the night vomiting everything in my body in dry heaving. After that, I woke up the next morning in a pile of pillows and blankets on the bathroom floor. My last memory was at the bar getting a second drink, and my friends filled me in on everything that happened. Feeling like crap, I thought I must have drunk way too much, but I've never blacked out before in my life, and the amount of drinks I had, only 2 in 2 hours, since I didn't get to my second at the bar, didn't add up to me being completely unconscious. We all decided that my first drink had to have been drugged since Nadia had some of it and had no memory of our walk even though she was fully functional. I'm sure that the man that was talking to Nadia and then followed us back was the one that slipped something in my drink. To this day, I don't really know how I could have been slipped something because I got my drink from the bar and never set it down. My best guess was that it was already in the cup. Thankfully, I had a good friend and kind strangers protecting me that night. It keeps me up at night thinking about what could have happened under different circumstances. My name is Arthur. I've been a trucker for various companies for the better part of 15 years now. Things have become pretty routine at this point. Pick up the goods and materials, verify them for accuracy, and deliver them as instructed. We're not paid by the hour, so efficiency is the most important thing in this line of work. For someone like me who's been doing this forever, I like to think I can outwork all these young guns that are snapping these jobs up. This isn't always great, though. Usually, I push myself to the absolute limit when it comes to functioning on barely any sleep. 4 years ago, I was working for a warehouse based in North Dakota. For anyone who doesn't know, North Dakota is one of the flattest states, which makes trucking a little easier. This also meant that skipping out on a few hours of sleep could mean the difference between employment and getting the sack. It was a chilly Tuesday morning in May. The beginning of the week meant that more loads needed to be shipped, which meant more work for me. I wanted to knock it all out in one shot, so I traced my route into Montana accordingly, planning on not stopping even once to sleep. I hit the road a few hours after lunch, expecting to reach my destination very early the next morning. I pushed the semi as much as possible, doing maybe a couple over the speed limit. It was getting late, and I remember rubbing the crust from my eyelids as the clock ticked past midnight. I was having trouble keeping my eyes open, but I only had about an hour left in this drive, so I gritted my teeth and kept going. My buddy Tristan, who was also a trucker, introduced me to smelling salts when I first started out. If you don't know, smelling salts are basically some kind of crystals in a little bottle. One sniff and you're wide awake. You had to be careful, though. Too many back-to-back uses could be dangerous, or at least that's what Tristan told me. They burn your nose a little bit, but whenever I needed a boost, I'd reach for the smelling salts first. This was one of those times. I took a big whiff and shot my head back, my reflexes taking over. I felt the adrenaline course through my body and hoped the feeling would last the rest of the drive. A half hour shot by, and I was really struggling. I felt myself start to doze off, and the blare of my truck drifting into the shoulder jolted me awake. This was getting dangerous, I thought. I had to pull off. I was all alone on the highway, but there was nowhere to pull off. There were just woods on either side of me. I slowed the truck down, searching desperately for somewhere to pull over. At this low speed, my headlights pierced through the darkness, and I was able to see a lot more. As I looked around, I saw something that confused me. There was a purple dress lying in the middle of the road. What the hell, I thought, rubbing my eyes. Was I hallucinating? I blinked like 6 times just to make sure I wasn't going crazy. It was real. I approached the dress with my truck and stared at it as I rolled by. In hindsight, this should have been more of a red flag, but I think I was just too exhausted to process what was going on. About 200 or so yards away, I passed a pair of shoes. Now I was starting to freak out. What the hell was going on? I passed the shoes, praying to God there would be a place to pull off soon. My old man Finn was a super religious guy, so I clutched his old cross and hoped he would come through for me. A little further up the road, I saw a bunch more random clothing, some of which looked like little kids' clothing. This time, I stopped the truck. The panic started to set in. Something was very, very wrong. I sat in the driver's seat with the truck at a standstill. I was expecting something to happen, but it never did. So I did what my instincts told me to do. I stepped out of the truck and went to inspect the clothing. I still remember the feeling of the chilly morning air piercing my skin, which definitely helped my exhaustion. I approached the pile as cautiously as I could. It was indeed kids' clothing. It looked like there were both boy and girl pieces of clothing in the pile. I looked around into the woods, but I couldn't see much of anything in the darkness. I had my head on a swivel, worried that this was some kind of trap. I decided it was not my business to figure out what was going on, so I made my way back to my truck. Just then, I heard a crunch from the left. I whipped around, trying to see what was there. I stood there, waiting to hear another sound. After about 30 seconds, there was another crunch, but this time from the opposite side of the road. My survival instincts kicked in, and I sprinted towards the truck. I jumped into the front seat, but just before I slammed the door, I heard a child's scream ring out. I froze, my heart bursting out of my chest. I was caught at a crossroads. I wasn't going to fight some random people in pitch-black woods, but I couldn't just abandon some helpless kids either. Before I could make a decision, another almost identical child's scream rang out. Without thinking, I turned the truck on and pointed its nose toward the spot in the woods where I heard the noise. My headlights lit up about 30 yards into the woods. There were 3 or 4 people, one of whom was holding a massive speaker. They ducked behind a couple of trees as my truck lit them up, but I had exposed them for just enough time to make out what they were doing. They hid from the light before I could really make out any distinctive features, but I swear on my old man Finn's grave, they were holding up a speaker, trying to lure me into the woods with a fake kid screaming. I was just in shock. I just sat there staring at the trees those people had just hidden behind. I reached for my phone to call the police, but before I finished dialing, I heard a thump from the body of the truck. Someone had thrown something from the other direction. I was done. I turned back to face the road and slammed on the gas. As I sped off, I could make out a person on the other side of the road. He shouted something I couldn't understand before launching something at the truck that cracked the glass of my passenger side window. I drove the final hour in silence. I was too scared to process what had just happened, but there was no way in hell I was stopping to sleep in those woods. I completed my delivery and then knocked out. I must have slept for 10 hours straight. When I woke up, the first thing I did was call the police, who told me they'd investigate those woods and give me any updates. I then thought about my island on June 28, 1947. Captain Tony, who worked as a harbor patrolman officer in Ireland, was on patrol with his 2 rookies, his son, and his dog. However, this was no ordinary day at sea. When Tony gazed up into the sky from his patrol boat, he saw 6 aircraft floating around 1,500 feet above his watercraft. The objects were reported by Tony and his crew to be made of a reflective material and were shaped like flat donuts, about 100 feet in diameter. The center holes located on each craft were noted to be about 25 feet in diameter, and more circular objects were located along the sides of the aircraft, which Tony and his crew determined to be observation windows. Soon, Tony and his fellow crewmen noticed that 5 of the UFOs circled over the 6th, and the 6th itself was lowering towards the patrol boat. This caused immense panic among the crew because they all thought that the aircraft was going to collide with their patrol boat. Not wanting to be sent to a watery grave, the crew hightailed it toward the shore. Upon reaching the shore, Tony retrieved his binoculars to spot the bizarre aircraft from the shore. He also grabbed his camera to take photos as evidence of the strange aircraft. While taking the pictures, the lower craft stayed in a still position while the 5 others circled around it for about 5 minutes. Then, the lower aircraft suddenly dropped down but stopped abruptly at about 500 feet above the water. One of the 5 ships circling around the lower ship came down to meet it. The 2 crafts stayed in this position for several minutes until Tony thought he heard a thump. Instantaneously, more thumps followed, and Tony, using his binoculars, saw that the middle aircraft was dropping what Tony suspected to be newspapers from the inside of its center hole as it swiftly approached his watercraft. When the aircraft got close enough, it was discovered that the objects weren't newspapers but instead white, lightweight metals and black, lava-like rocks. Tony even stated that when the lava-like rocks landed in the sea, it caused the water to steam. With these dangerous pieces of debris falling ever closer to their boat, the crew sought cover below deck. However, not before one of the materials struck Tony's dog, killing it in the process, and another one wounded his son in the arm. Tony even tried to radio for assistance, but the transmitter wasn't functioning. Even though his radio was out of action and no help was on the way, most of the debris splashed into the water. Soon after the raining of metals and rocks, the airships rose up high into the sky and zoomed westward together. The crew then exited the lower deck and examined the boat for any damage. Luckily for the crew, the boat was hardly damaged, and they set sail back to their dock, lowering the dog over the side and into the water in the form of a burial at sea. Upon docking, Tony took his son to the hospital so that his wounds could be treated and afterwards explained the incident to his boss, Mark, who didn't believe Tony. When the photos Tony took of his patrol were printed and examined, the strange airships Tony had informed him of and showed him in the now-developed photos were compared and believed to be film noise and damage caused by radiation. Not wanting to shy away from proving the incident's authenticity, Tony returned to island to collect rock samples in hopes of finding the ones dropped from the middle aircraft that he had encountered during the incident. Tony reported that while he did this, he spotted one of the aircraft hovering above him as if it were spying on him. He eventually gathered the rocks and was preparing to show them to his boss the next day. But when that day came, he was visited by a small, pale man in a black suit. The man suggested that the pair of them should get breakfast together, to which Tony agreed. So, he followed the stranger to a restaurant. While they ate breakfast together, the strange man asked no questions but instead gave a descriptive account about what Tony had witnessed the previous day and eventually warned Tony that bad things would happen not only to him but to his entire family. Men then acknowledged that Tony had been telling the truth. So, the pair of them sent a package to publisher Ray Palmer in Chicago, who later founded Fate magazine. The contents inside the package were the metal fragments and statements about the strange incidents and findings on the 21st and 22nd of June, a noteworthy incident that we continue to discuss and debate amongst ourselves to this day. Yet not even a month later would another incident occur that is possibly the most well-known and talked about alien encounter in history, Roswell. On July 8, 1947, in the small town of Roswell, New Mexico, there were reports of a flying disc that crashed into the desert not far from the Walker Air Base. This made front headlines around the world. The reports noted that bodies of aliens had been retrieved from the crash site and were hauled to the infamous Area 51 Air Base in the Nevada desert, where autopsies were performed and carried out. Shortly afterwards, a press release by high military authorities stated that rumors of a flying saucer had become something of a reality and that an intelligence officer at the Roswell Army Airfield was fortunate enough to gain and hold possession of one of the saucers. This statement sent newspaper reports of the incident around the world insane, and news headlines of this Roswell flying saucer were everywhere. However, just 24 hours later, that high military authority changed their story, stating that they had made a mistake and that the flying saucer was actually, in fact, a weather balloon. Unbelievably, the public appeared to have accepted this explanation, and very little was said about the Roswell incident for many years afterwards. It wasn't until the late 1970s when some military personnel involved began to speak out about what happened all those years ago, and ufologists, as well as conspiracy theorists, went into overdrive, thus developing the Roswell case into the incident as we know it today. One of the first military personnel to speak out about the Roswell UFO incident was Major Jesse Marcel. He was one of the 2 military personnel sent to investigate the crash site. The other one who was with Major Jesse Marcel was Sheridan Cabot, who had always claimed that he wasn't even there. Major Jesse Marcel described how large amounts of metallic debris were scattered all over the area, so the craft had obviously hit the ground at a high speed. He stated that it was clearly not a weather balloon, aircraft, or missile because he recovered fragments from the crash and described seeing hieroglyphic types of writing painted on it. The metal was also reported by him to be light, thin as paper, but incredibly strong and hard, which was unlike anything he had ever seen in his career and life before. He also helped answer the question as to where the fragments were taken by simply saying not only did they have the one he analyzed but others as well, which are being kept well preserved in a military installation somewhere. Marcel's story doesn't end there, however, because later in life he told his expanding family about his investigation at Roswell. According to his grandson, my grandfather Marcel would privately share details of his experiences with the entire family. And when I was a kid, basically around the dinner table, he told us how he was the head of intelligence and lead investigator of the 509 bombing group. He would talk about it with people, continuously asking a multitude of questions about the Roswell UFO incident. The National Security Agency published a report in 1994, a staggering 47 years after the initial incident, which stated that the alien bodies supposedly recovered from the crash site were, in fact, just life-size test dummies. Many saw this as the government just trying to dig itself out and cover up the situation, which only continued to fuel conspiracy theories. Lots more witnesses came forward and spoke out about the Roswell UFO incident, including a photographer who claims that he was asked if he could photograph the crash site. He explained how he was asked to take photos inside a dark-tinted area where he observed 4 identical bodies with humongous heads and shadowy skin. After taking the pictures, he was debriefed and ordered to forget everything he noticed at the crash site. But then a witness more credible than everybody else combined spoke out just before he passed away in 2005. His name was Lieutenant Walter Hutt, the man who published and released the original weather balloon report back in 1947. Before his passing, he wrote and left a sworn affidavit in which he claimed that the weather balloon story was a cover-up for the UFO that had been successfully recovered from the crash site. He also confirmed that he had seen dead alien bodies in this still widely debated Roswell UFO incident. With these 2 incidents raising so much speculations and questions, one might ask if we will ever know what went on. However, as the years fly by and as the people who were involved or witnessed these incidents pass away, we are really only drifting further away from the inevitable answer. So until the government sheds light on this mystery or the next incident does that for us, we can only continuously marvel at the fact that these 2 instances combined have been not only the gateway to extraterrestrial debates as we know them today, but also might just be the biggest government cover-ups in history regarding human contact with alien and otherworldly beings. Though these 2 events are the most widely renowned encounters with extraterrestrials, thousands of encounters have been reported throughout the world to the present day. I never told anyone this story because I never thought they would believe me. I was home alone one evening and had gone to sleep for the night. I lived with my significant other and 2 indoor cats, but she was out of state traveling for business. It was late afternoon, and I was probably around 10 years of age at the time. I was on my way home from my school football when I realized an odd man was walking along my street. At first, I stopped walking and examined the man for a moment. There was something about him that just did not sit right with me, the way he moved, the way he looked, the way he was looking at things in such definitive detail. I could not really put my finger on it. All I knew was that his presence made me feel extremely uncomfortable. I went and sat behind a car so he could not see me, and I waited for a few moments as he walked into somebody's driveway out of view. I ran back to my house, which was only a few doors down. It did not take me too long to reach my driveway. However, when I stepped onto my driveway, I felt like I was being watched. I did not look back. I rushed into my house to tell my mom and grandparents what I had just seen. Of course, they just brushed it off and made an excuse for it to not be some kind of alien man. I could not be bothered to stand around and try to convince them, so I went up to my room and stared. I stared out the window for a while, and then there they were. My window looks out into the driveway, so I could see him clearly. He was tall, maybe 6'5" or so, and extremely skinny. His neck was abnormally long, and his shoulders were narrow. He wore a white sports jersey and a pair of baggy jeans. The top of his head was large and veiny. Overall, he was a weird-looking person. I bolted downstairs with the most intense adrenaline rush I had ever had to tell my family. Out of breath, I stuttered out my words, and they walked out into the living room to take a look for themselves. My mom's face turned pale as she stared into the eyes of the person who was now stood up right against the living room window, so close, in fact, that you could see the condensation from his breath on the glass. He gently pulled up a notebook from his pocket and started writing. As this happened, everything was quiet, and everybody was frozen in place. It was the eeriest atmosphere I have ever experienced. A few seconds passed, and he finished taking his notes. He strolled back to the driveway. Still pale, my mom turned to me with an expression of terror and complexion. The only thing we knew to do from here was to contact the police, which we did. However, they looked for this man all over the neighborhood and could not find him anywhere. Overall, this experience has probably been one of the most bizarre and terrifying I have ever had. I am hoping someone can help me figure out what happened here. I'm hoping somebody can tell me who or what this thing was. I've read a lot of things online, and this sounds a lot like abductions I've heard in the past. Luckily, I didn't get abducted, but what do you guys think? When things hit the fan with my parents, I had to move out. I was down on my luck living situation-wise and could only crash on the couches of my friends for so long. I was looking on all the roommate and apartment apps and websites, and I found something that caught my eye on this app. A man named Owen had listed a room for rent in his 3-bedroom, 1-story house. The rent price was $1,300 a month. He'd basically be my landlord and roommate, as he would also be living in the house. He made sure to note on the ad that he'd be out of the house most of the time and that the renter would have the place to themselves often. He did put in all capital letters a few ground rules though, including no parties, no large gatherings, no drinking in the living room, and no use of the basement. They seemed like pretty standard rules. I went to view the house in person and meet Owen. The second he opened the door, I got a bit of a read on him that he was a little reclusive. His demeanor was quiet and a little awkward. He showed me the house, and I could tell he was nervous because his voice would shake and he would stutter. The bedroom was a good size and the actual floor plan of the house was good. It was an open layout, meaning the kitchen, living room, and dining room were all one big open space. For $1,300 a month in my area, it was a steal. He laid out some more ground rules in person, and he emphasized again how I can't go in the attic or the basement as he used them for storage only. sounded fair enough. On the spot, I told him I was interested. We shook hands, I left, and 2 days later I was moving in. We didn't draft any sort of lease or contract. I was just going to be paying him off the books month to month, the first day of every month. I had settled in pretty quickly. The bedroom I was renting was already furnished with a bed and basic furniture, so all I did really was hang some of my wall decor and fill the dresser and closet with clothes. The bedroom had a lock on it, thankfully, and he gave me the key to it so I could lock it when he wasn't home, which seemed like a nice gesture at first. Owen never told me what he did for work. He just told me he usually wouldn't be home, but I quickly learned that wasn't true. Anytime I'd come home from work, his car was always in the driveway. Quickly, I started to pick up on loud sounds outside of my bedroom at night, from footsteps to doors opening and closing constantly. One night, I went out in the middle of the night just to go to the bathroom and I noticed the basement door was opened. I walked over to the top of the stairs and looked down. There was a dim light from down there, seemingly from a far corner out of view. I heard banging sounds coming from down there. It was like 2 a.m. What could he be doing down there? Then the banging stopped and Owen appeared at the bottom of the stairs and looked up at me. It was so creepy that describing it in words doesn't do it justice. He looked visibly annoyed as he looked up at me. I apologized and said I was just going to the bathroom. He almost angrily responded, "Shut the basement door." I listened to him, insanely weirded out. I went to the bathroom and then back to bed. I laid awake for a while after that, now with my mind racing, wondering what he was doing. About a week later, I returned home and noticed my bedroom door was unlocked. I always locked it before leaving every day. I looked around my room to see if anything was missing, and while nothing seemed to be missing, I noticed some things had been moved. For starters, my clothes in the dressers were not neatly stacked anymore. They had been looked through, I could tell. The closet door was also cracked open. It was dawning on me that he had his own key and he likely came into my room and went through my stuff. This felt like a clear invasion of privacy and a violation of my tenant rights. I had to figure out how to confront him about it. I went to knock on his bedroom door, but he didn't answer. His car was in the driveway once again, so he had to be home. I was getting such weird vibes from all this. I gave up and went back to my room after microwaving my dinner. While I was in my room relaxing and watching TV, I heard the door to Owen's room open. I took this opportunity to get up and confront him, so I went out to the living room and caught him in a hurry about to leave the house. I stopped him and asked if he went into my room. He looked at me with a blank expression and straight up said no. I delicately responded without being hostile, saying that the door was unlocked and some of my stuff appeared to have been gone through. He then claimed that I had the only key to my bedroom, and then he said he's in a hurry, he has to go, and he left. I was flabbergasted by all of this. I wanted to ask my parents for advice, but at that time, I hated them and wanted nothing to do with them. I was already back on the apps and websites looking up other listings. I knew I didn't want to stay here. Then I realized this was the first apparent time that Owen wasn't home while I was. Curiosity got the better of me, and I had to check out the basement. I checked out the windows first to make sure his car was gone, and it was. I then went over to open the basement door. Oddly enough, I couldn't find any light switches, so I just used the flashlight on my phone to navigate around. The steps were so creaky I felt like I was in an abandoned house. I got to the bottom, and there was a tan carpet that was curling upwards at the walls as if it were poorly fitted to the floor. It was a very small basement, at least the main room there was. There was just this one ugly couch in the middle of the room. There was also a slightly funky smell down there, and the smell only got worse as I got closer to this door in the corner. I attempted to open the door, but unfortunately, it was locked, or maybe I should say fortunately, because I'm not sure I fully wanted to know what was in there admitting that smell. It almost smelled like raw sewage, but worse. I did one little quick sweep around the main room of the basement and found nothing, just some taped up cardboard boxes, which I was not going to open. I went back upstairs and shut the door. The rest of that night, I stayed in my room. I never heard Owen come back. He must have gotten back after I had fallen asleep. I woke up, the room was still dark. My alarm was not going off, something else had woken me up. I heard the floor next to my bed creak, and I turned and saw Owen leaning over my bed, looking at me. I screamed, and he replied to me to shush and then asked me if I went into the basement. I screamed no. How did you get in here? I locked the door. He then asked me, are you sure? I flipped the cards on him and yelled, did you come into this room when I wasn't home? He replied no, then turned around and walked toward the door. I asked, how did you get in here then? I saw him hold up his hand in the dark. He wasn't holding anything at the time, I didn't know what it meant. He said to me before leaving the room, I think you should find other living arrangements, and then he closed the door. I started packing right then and there. I wasn't staying another minute in that house. I knocked on his door and yelled at him to give me half of the rent money back since I'd only been there like 2 weeks. Moments later, he opened the door, and just his arm stuck out from the door holding a small stack of $100 bills. He managed to make even handing me the money insanely creepy. I grabbed it, it was only $400. Whatever, it was close enough. I just wanted to get out of there. I was fully packed and out of there within an hour. I slept in my car that night. I ended up back at my parents' house the next day, and after explaining the ludicrous events I just went through, something changed where they were more welcoming to have me back. I still moved out a month later, but my parents and I are fine now. If you're choosing to have a random roommate from online, just be careful and use your best judgment after meeting them. Creepy carnival workers. So this happened when I was younger, quite a while ago, but it's one of the creepiest things that has ever happened to me, and I thought y'all might like to hear it. Anyways, I was probably about 10 or 11 years old, and my mom dropped me and my younger brother off at this little carnival thing in the supermarket parking lot. I don't know if they really do stuff like that anymore, but they used to set up smaller carnivals with maybe like 10 rides and a couple of food vendors. Anyways, we had been there for maybe an hour, and I noticed that this guy had been watching us for a while. Then I realized that he was sort of following us around to the different rides. I figured he was one of the workers since he was wearing a carnival hat and his clothes were pretty much the same colors as the other people working there. I would look around and spot him watching us from a couple of rides over or standing next to one of the food stands. Now, I don't want to be rude, but this guy had the creepiest freaking face. One of his eyes looked like it had been swallowed up by this huge swollen eyelid. He had these chapped lips that looked like they were bleeding in places, and he just kept following us around for like 30 minutes, mumbling to himself and staring. After a while, I decided that we should leave and find a way to call my mom. As we were about to leave the carnival area, literally about to walk through the exit, this guy hollers to both of us and grabs my brother's shoulder to pull him back in. He started telling us that we're too young to be there alone and asking where our parents are. I mean, I was young, but there were tons of kids there even younger than us without their parents. He pulled us off to the side area between 2 rides and pushed us behind him, then just stood guard in front of us like that. I kept asking to use a phone to call my mother since I was still hoping it was actually about us being too young to be there by ourselves. Finally, he gives me this phone that obviously has no SIM card in it or something because it just displays that error message that old phones used to have. I kept begging him to let us go, and he kept muttering, "No, we're going to take you somewhere real safe, real safe." Then he starts laughing and asked if my mom had picked up, which obviously not, and saying he's going to have to take us himself since there's no one else to take us, whatever that he had planned. Finally, we see another worker walking by and I yell to her if I can use her phone. The guy immediately freezes and then just starts walking away like nothing happened. I explained to the woman what had happened and she just looked really confused and kind of worried. I didn't find out until a couple years later, but I guess she told my mom that she didn't think the guy even worked there, that she had never seen him before in her time working. So that happened. Why I'm done with the local fair. Every year since about the 5th grade, I've gone to our little town fair. It used to be in the mall parking lot, huge, well-kept, polite staff, and always busy for the week or so it was here. But the last 2 years, it's been rather small and kind of shady. The staff moved to a smaller, empty lot behind our local Outback. This year, my boyfriend took me as a little, "I'm sorry we're not going to prom" gesture. We're walking around for a little bit. It's still pretty early in the day, so it seems like mostly little kids and their parents are there. He and I decide we'll go to ride the bull, something I've done quite a few times growing up going to rodeos. This was his first time. I paid for him and begged him to do it with me. I explained what he had to do, how he can't hold on with 2 hands and whatnot, and he does well for his first time, about 15 seconds at full speed and shaking. Now it's my turn. I hop on and ride with no issues. I'm wearing skinny jeans, so I'm not entirely shocked when I get a wolf whistle about the little bit of lace that got flashed on one turn. Turning around thinking it was just my boyfriend, I walk off and walk back up to him, dizzy. A carny comes up and tells me I was one of the longest riders in this town. I quickly thank him and give him a big, proud smile, holding on to my boyfriend. He quickly pulls me away to the carousel and leans down to kiss me. I stand up on my tiptoes to reach him. The same carny, apparently working this ride, comes up to us and, in the most sarcastic tone possible, goes, "Aren't you cute?" Keep in mind, this guy is probably about 30 years old and smells like weed mixed with fair food. He looks at my boyfriend and goes, "But maybe she deserves someone a little better fit for her, or at least knows how to ride a bull." I pull my boyfriend out of line, pissed off and grossed out. He tells me we'll go when the guy's not there. We walk around some more, get some treats, and ride some other things. Probably about an hour later, we head back to the carousel. I'm carrying my big stuffed koala bear, and we get back in line. No sign of the creepy carny. We get our wristbands, stand, and get on. I sit on the outside while my boyfriend sits on the middle horse. The ride's going, and suddenly the creepy carny is back. He hops on quickly and holds on to the pole my horse is attached to. He just stares at me for a bit until I go, "Can I help you?" My boyfriend is watching, slightly amused. I'm not something to be messed with, and he knows as much. The carny looks at me, his gross yellow teeth stretched out in a grin, and goes, "Yeah, how about you show me more of that lace, and I'll get you a bigger bear than that sad thing." I'm completely disgusted and creeped out. I tell him to fuck off before I call the cops, and he's not getting the message until the ride stops. My boyfriend stands up, he towers over this guy and goes, "Hey, she said fuck off or I'll have the cops here in 2 minutes." The creepy carny buggers off and follows us around the rest of the night until I'm so freaked out we have to leave. So, creepy carnival worker, let's not meet again. I hate carnivals. I think they're disgusting and filled with children. I hate the food, the games, and the smell of it all. My hatred of carnivals is probably biased, though, and mostly based on what I'm about to tell you. A few years ago, I was dragged to our local carnival by my younger sister. I obviously wasn't going to be rude and not go, but I wasn't looking forward to it. After a while, my sister got bored and wanted to leave, so I called my mom to pick us up. I actually opted not to go with them as I was in the midst of a fight with my dad and didn't want to go back home until he was asleep. I told my mom I'd walk home later, so she picked up my sister and left. The carnival was honestly a little pathetic. There were far fewer people there that night than I remember there being in previous years, and everyone looked miserable. I figured I might as well walk around a little to try and get my money's worth. After all, I had paid for a ticket out of my own pocket. I decided to step into the fun house as I figured that would at least be a little cool. I was expecting there to be a ton of people in there, but it was completely empty. There was literally not a single other person in there as far as I could tell. I had never been inside a fun house alone before. People don't realize how important the laughter and talking is to the atmosphere. Without it, you're basically just standing there in silence, surrounded by a bunch of weird mirrors. It was honestly a little creepy. I shrugged my shoulders and figured I might as well walk through it. Admittedly, I did get a pretty good laugh out of the distorted mirrors. I think I was like halfway through when I noticed something odd in one of the reflections. To my left, there was a head that seemed to be peering at me. I only saw it for a split second, but it was a bald guy with really sunken eyes. I whipped around but didn't see anyone. To be completely honest, I had no idea where he had even been standing. Since there were mirrors all over the place, he could have literally been anywhere. I thought it was especially creepy since I didn't hear the funhouse entrance open. He either snuck in behind me or he had already been inside. I kept walking, going a little more quickly now, and then I saw him again out of the corner of my eye. He had this deranged smile. This time it was the exact same face, I was positive. I tried to figure out where he was standing, but the reflections were too confusing. I yelled for him to get lost but got no response. I wasn't sure what I was expecting. I picked up the pace again, but it was difficult trying to navigate this maze of mirrors, and I kept hitting dead ends. I started sweating, constantly looking over my shoulder every few seconds. A few minutes later, I turned a corner after hitting another dead end, and a hand reached out from behind one of the mirrors, grabbing my wrist. I screamed, cursing at the guy to let go of me, but he held firm. I punched his arm, forcing him to let go. I fell to the ground in the fray and saw the creepster in his full form. He was wearing all gray, had a bit of a gut, and a tired, sunken face. I jumped to my feet before he could reach for me again and sprinted back the way I came. I don't know if it was survival instincts or not, but finding my way back to the entrance was somehow easier with the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I sprinted out of the fun house and caught my breath. I reached into my back pocket, and a horrifying realization hit me: I didn't have my wallet. I must have dropped it when I fell. There was no way I was going back in there. After running to the nearest staff person, I told them everything that happened. She seemed confused and told me that the fun house was closed to patrons that night. I was horrified. They called the police and searched it but found nothing, not even my wallet. I felt like such an idiot. I told them that that guy was probably an ex-employee with a key, but they shrugged off my theory and told me to go home. So reluctantly, that's what I did. It's not like I had gotten hurt or anything. I wish I could tell you the story ended there, but I can't. A week later, my girlfriend called me one night in a panic, frantically screaming into the phone about something terrible that happened. Apparently, someone had been texting her phone pretending to be me and convinced her to drive out to this remote location to help me change a tire. Thankfully, she decided to bring her dad even though the guy told her to come alone. They pretty quickly realized what was going on when the car parked in the lot wasn't mine. Her dad stepped out of the car, and 6 dudes stepped out of the car in front of them. He sprinted back to the car and hightailed it out of there before those guys could catch up to him. The whole thing made sense. I did have my girlfriend's number written down on a slip of paper in my wallet, which explains how he got her number. Both of us changed all our contact information, and it's been a month without incident. I really don't know how to feel about this whole ordeal. I think I'm just going to try to block the memory out of my head. This happened when I was like 16 and in my heavy gaming phase, still living with my parents. I played a lot of League of Legends in my room on my computer in those days, especially in the summertime when it's so unbearably hot outside and I preferred to stay inside in the air conditioning. Anyway, way back when I lived at home, I'd have the place to myself a lot because my parents traveled a lot and I was the last one to move out. If I recall correctly, this was on a Friday night or a night that school was out the next day because I was staying up late. After I got home from school, I submitted a paper that was due that night to get it over with. Then, I had to do some shopping afterward on my mom's orders since they'd be gone for a while. It was how I earned my keep in the house, according to my dad. They left cash for me to use. I always had to show them the receipt though so that I wouldn't just pocket any of the money. My mom gave me a shopping list, so I went to Whole Foods in my old Camry, my first car. Shopping took about an hour. While in the grocery store, this guy in line behind me started talking to me, and I don't know why. He made a comment about one of the things I was buying and just wouldn't stop, even as I was bagging my groceries. He kept talking to me, which I found weird. He wasn't paying attention to anyone else. I was still nice though. When it was time to leave, I said, "Have a good one," and left. I went out to my car in the parking lot, packed the trunk, then headed home. It was a scorching hot day as we were in early June. I wasn't looking to go out and do anything outside. Once I was done with everything I needed to do, it was dark out by now, so I got right on League of Legends on my computer and texted my friend David to get on as well. He joined my party, and we played some dual rank as we always did. I was using my noise-canceling headset. We were committed already to playing League of Legends all night and ranking up, so of course, I needed to take a break to make dinner at some point. Probably 2 hours into playing, I told David I was going to eat dinner and I'd probably be back on in an hour. He said he'd be back on later too. So with that, I took a break and made some pasta for dinner. The kitchen is downstairs and my room is upstairs. While I was sitting in the kitchen eating, I knew for sure I heard a thump from upstairs. Did it sound like a footstep? I wasn't sure. It could have been any number of things, but the last thing I'd imagine it would be was a footstep. I did, however, go and lock the front door. Now, oftentimes for a while, I would leave the door unlocked just because my parents' house is in a good side of town, and I just never took the idea of a break-in seriously. It's something you hear about on the news, but don't think it'll ever happen to you. I went upstairs, and I don't know what I was expecting, but I said my brother Tristan's name into the hallway. I knew he wasn't supposed to be here, but I don't know. I heard a sound and I felt the urge to see if anyone was here. When no one answered back, I went back to my room and got back on League of Legends. I put my headset back on and texted David that I'm going back on. Shortly after, he came back on. We started playing again. A couple of games in, I looked to my left at the doorway of my room into the hallway. I don't know if something in my peripheral vision or some other sense felt something there, but I would leave the door open when I was home alone as my mom would tell me to. The hallway was dark except for the one little nightlight plugged into an outlet. My room shone blue from my wall lights. Some of the blue poured into the part of the hallway closest to my room. In between the crack of the door was total blackness. I couldn't see through it. I didn't think anything of it. After our next game, David said he was taking a leak and walked away. While we were in the lobby, I looked at my phone, then looked back out to the hallway, and I noticed something was different. Now I could see through the crack of the door into the hallway. My first thought was someone blocking it just minutes ago? By instinct, I spun my chair around to face the bed behind me, and there was a man sitting on my bed with his freakishly upright posture and his hands resting on his thighs. He almost looked to be smiling. I was so alarmed I jumped out of my seat onto the desk and crawled onto the desk, causing my monitor and basically everything else to fall off of it. I screamed, "What do you want?" And he started to actually smile now, showing his teeth like he was laughing. I ran out of the room into the hallway. I stopped halfway down the hallway and looked back at my bedroom door. I heard the springs of my bed lifting, and then the guy slowly walked into the doorway and stopped. He stood there. I once again yelled, "What do you want?" He then spoke in a stuttered, slow voice, asking if he could play too. I asked, "How did you get in here?" He stepped a few steps forward and pointed down the stairs. I assumed he was implying he entered through the front door. I was at a loss for what to do, so I ran down the stairs to the landline phone, as my cell phone was still in my room. I grabbed the phone and a kitchen knife and screamed, "You need to leave. I'm calling 911. I heard footsteps walking down the steps, and the last time I saw the guy was when he walked past the kitchen, looked at me, and then I heard him walking out the front door. I ran to slam it shut and lock it. For the first time ever, I was ashamed of myself for leaving the door completely unlocked. I held the phone for a few minutes, deciding whether to tell my parents. Ultimately, I did. My mom was concerned at first, then grew livid, so much so to the point that she put my dad on the phone. He told me to go through the house and make sure nothing was taken. I went through every room, and honestly, everything seemed in place. I said the man seemed like something was off about him. The man didn't seem overtly hostile, but something was wrong with him, and I don't know what his intention was. The image of him sitting on my bed and the realization that he was watching me through the crack in the door was haunting enough. Our first story begins on a Friday night, the air thick with anticipation. A young man named Jack, an avid gamer, scoured online marketplaces for a deal on a used console, eager to dive into the latest releases. He stumbled upon an offer that seemed too good to be true, a current-gen console, practically brand new, being sold at a fraction of the retail price. The seller, only identified as KL, was vague in his responses, claiming he simply needed to get rid of it. Despite a prickle of unease, Jack dismissed his better judgment and arranged to meet KL at a dimly lit gas station later that evening. The seller, a gaunt man with nervous eyes, arrived in a beat-up car, the console hastily wrapped in a garbage bag. He practically shoved it into Jack's hands, eager to be rid of the device. Jack, his excitement overriding his apprehension, paid the man and hurried home, eager to boot up his new purchase. As he connected the console to his TV, he noticed an unsettling detail he had overlooked in his haste, a single deep scratch etched across the top of the console, almost resembling a cryptic symbol. Brushing it off as nothing more than cosmetic damage, Jack grabbed his controller and prepared to enter a world of digital entertainment. From the moment he pressed the power button, things felt off. The console whirred to life with an unnatural hum, the fan noise louder and more erratic than it should have been. The screen flickered, displaying distorted images and garbled text before snapping into focus, revealing the console's home screen. But something was different. The usual cheerful background was replaced with a static image of a dark, desolate forest, the trees twisted and gnarled, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. Jack chalked it up to a corrupted hard drive, a minor inconvenience he could easily fix with a factory reset. As he navigated the console's menu, he noticed strange glitches, the cursor moving on its own, selecting options he hadn't chosen. The console seemed to have a mind of its own, its actions becoming increasingly erratic and unsettling. Unease curdled in his stomach, but Jack, determined to make his new purchase work, continued to tinker with the settings, attempting to restore the console to its factory settings. His efforts were met with resistance, the console seemingly fighting back, the screen flashing with disturbing imagery, grotesque figures with hollow eyes and gaping maws flickering in and out of existence. Cold dread washed over Jack as he realized that this was no ordinary glitch. A few years ago, I used to play video games and stream them online. I was not really popular or anything, I just did it for fun. I would stream on Twitch for my friends, and usually anywhere from 1 to 3 or 4 of them would watch. Sometimes they would play with me in the games as well. Every now and then a few other random people would watch the stream too, but I never got more than like 10 viewers at once. I wasn't trying to become famous or anything. One night, I was streaming Fortnite. It was almost a nightly thing for me to do at the time. I was playing with my friend Luck, who was also watching the stream. I remember that at one point, I saw there was another viewer, and soon the new viewer started talking in the chat and leaving comments. I did not recognize the username to be any of my friends, and I realized it was a new person. I said hi to them and welcomed them to the stream. The person responded, saying hi, but a short time later, their comments turned bad. It started with basic insults, calling me names and cursing at me. I assumed it to be some teenage kid just messing around on a Twitch account. I remember asking on the stream why he was so angry. My friend was thinking that it was really funny, though. The comments then got threatening. The user said something like they were going to find me and they knew where I lived or something along those lines. Obviously, I didn't take the threat very seriously. I really had no idea why they would act this way because my stream was always pretty fun and lighthearted. The first comment the person made that really raised my eyebrows, though, was when they mentioned my real name. They said they knew my name, and when I asked what it was, the user commented it. This shocked me because my name was not my username or anything, and this person knew my last name as well. It was then that I figured it had to be one of my friends messing with me, and that's what Luck thought as well. I remember Luck asking who it was, going through a list of friends that he thought it could be. The person denied it all. After going back and forth for a bit, the person eventually left, and I ended the stream a short time later. But the very next night, the person was back. I went back on what I usually did and was playing Fortnite again. Luck also joined, and it was just the two of us like the night prior. Well, maybe 30 minutes into the stream, the mystery person returned. They started commenting again, picking up right where they left off, but this time they said they were going to my house. I was kind of like, okay, buddy, let's see it, and still not taking it seriously. They went quiet in the chat for a while, but then out of nowhere, the person commented that they were at my house. Then I heard this loud knocking coming from the front door. I lived in a house that I rented with a roommate during this time. My roommate was gone at work, and I was at home by myself. After I heard the knocking, I told Luck about it, who seemed shocked. This definitely had to be a friend, I said. I was getting up and went over to go look. After leaving my bedroom and starting to enter the living room, I could see somebody through the front window. There was a man standing on the front step who was wearing all black and a ski mask. He did not resemble any of my friends, but I guess it could have been one of them. I just had a bad feeling about it, though, like this was somebody else. I went back into my bedroom and asked the guy through my stream what he wanted. He did not respond to this, but loudly knocked again on the front door. I was not going to answer it. The mysterious man then made a comment that he hated my car. I don't know why he said this, but then he left the stream. I really had no idea as to what was going on. Me and Luck talked about who it could be, and I told him that I thought it was someone totally random. Luck was telling me that I should go out and confront the guy. Eventually, I left my bedroom to go check, but the guy was gone now. I looked out of every window and didn't see him. Well, the next day, I was leaving for work. When I got to my car in the driveway, there was a big dent in the driver's door, like somebody had hit it with something. I remembered the comment the guy made about hating my car, which is a Pontiac Aztec. Now I knew none of my friends would go so far as to damage my vehicle. After that, I decided to stop streaming for a while. I told all my friends about it, and like I expected, none of them knew who it could be. It remains a mystery to me to this day. I don't live in that house anymore. I did stream on Twitch again a while after it happened, but the guy never joined another stream or at least never said anything. This is one of the craziest things that's ever happened to me. It took place back when I was in high school. I was, I believe, a junior during this time and loved to play video games. I had a good friend at school named Noah, who I would game with almost on a nightly basis. We would hang out all the time as well, and he lived just a few blocks over. On this night, we were playing video games online on our PlayStation 4s. I was at my house, and he was at his. We had headsets so we could talk to each other as we were on. I remember that after playing for a while, Noah said, "What was that?" It kind of came out of nowhere, and I assumed that he was just talking about the game. I asked him what and he didn't answer me at first. Then all of a sudden, he said, "What the," and it kind of abruptly went quiet. I heard some other noises but couldn't make them out. I didn't know what was going on. I asked Noah what he was doing, but he did not answer me. Everything was silent for a while. After, I sent Noah a Snapchat asking him what that was all about. I was really confused, but Noah did not immediately open it. So, I got curious and was kind of concerned. I decided to walk over to his place. Maybe he was playing a prank on me, but I felt like I should go ask him. We were such good friends, and it wasn't that weird for me to do that. So, I left my house at whatever time it was, probably like 10 p.m. It was dark out, and after walking a few blocks, I arrived at Noah's street. It was quiet, and we both lived in a pretty typical neighborhood for the most part. When I reached Noah's house, I wasn't sure if his parents were home or not because most of the lights in the house appeared to be off. I walked up to the front door and knocked on it. At first, there was no answer. It was very quiet. But a short time after knocking, I heard what sounded like somebody who may be in the backyard. After waiting a while, I knocked again. I couldn't see into the backyard from where I was. I continued to wait at the front door, wondering if I should investigate the noises I had heard in the back. Maybe Noah had gone outside, but I didn't really know why he would. Then finally, I heard someone walking towards the front door inside. The door then opened, and Noah was standing there. He looked very serious and told me to come inside quickly. I got in, and then he closed and locked the door. He said a man had been inside his house, and he was calling the police. He added that he thought the man just left. Noah went back and got his phone from his bedroom and dialed 911. He told me that his parents were gone, and he was home alone. We both waited for the police in his parents' room because it had a lock on it. Nobody else entered the house or was in it while we waited. The police got there shortly after and spoke to us. I guess what happened is when I was gaming with Noah, he heard a noise from behind his house. It sounded like the back door, which led to the kitchen, was opening. It must have been left unlocked or something because an unknown person did, in fact, enter. After hearing the footsteps, Noah ran to his closet to hide. He was able to hide but did not have his phone and couldn't call the police. Then I must have heard him running to his closet, and he said that he completely forgot about me on the headset. The headset was also not wireless, so he had to take it off to hide in his closet. While hiding, he heard the person walking around inside of his house. He hid all the way until I arrived at his place. When he heard the knock on the door, he said the man started walking around quickly and then left the house. I realized that I must have scared the guy off by knocking on the door. Noah was grateful to me for doing so. He then was able to leave, lock all the doors, get his phone to call the police, which was on the floor near his bed, and let me in the house. I don't know why the man entered the house or how he seemed to know that the door would be unlocked, but I'm really glad that I went over to Noah's. This happened way back in 2006. I was 17 and living in Uvalde, Texas, a very low-income neighborhood, the kind you'll find sprawled out all over the place in rural Texas when you're not right outside of a city. The closest city to me was San Antonio. I was going to some local community college because that's all my parents could afford for me. One of my best friends from high school, Bodie, moved to San Antonio to go to San Antonio College. He was living in some small apartment a little outside of the city with a roommate. His girlfriend would also often stay with him. Since the city is only really an hour and a half away, I would visit him all the time. He invited me this one weekend to come crash for the night, so I took my trusty old 1995 Toyota pickup truck. Just kidding, the thing was a piece of crap. The gas gauge didn't even work on it. I'd have to always just keep track of when the last time I filled the tank up was, then reset the trip mileage. I took Route 90, which was a straight shot from Uvalde to San Antonio. I was on the road at like 2:40 p.m. on a Friday, and there was no traffic at all. I got to Bodie at a reasonable time. His girlfriend wouldn't be getting there until tomorrow, so tonight we were going to go out. We stopped at a liquor store and drank in his apartment for a while with his roommate. Then the three of us went to this dive bar that would kind of look the other way with fake IDs. That was basically our night. We got back to their apartment around 2 a.m. after getting food. I slept on the couch. The next day would have almost been the same thing, but Bodie and his girlfriend were having issues all day. As the two of them got drunker as the night progressed, she started yelling at him in front of me, and it got really awkward and uncomfortable. I didn't really have much to drink that day because I was already iffy about staying the night with her there. I eventually decided I would just head back home. I said goodbye to everyone and started my journey home. It was very late at night. I want to guess midnight, maybe a little earlier. Route 90 was deserted at this time, so I would fly for my pickup standards. But suddenly, the engine started sputtering. I felt my heart completely drop as I realized I forgot to fill up the tank. I slowed down, but it was too late. The engine cut. I pulled to the side of the road and tried starting it a few times, but it did no good. I took out my cell phone, which was equally as shitty as my truck, and tried to get a signal. No shot. I couldn't even call for help. I had to just put my hazards on and hope a good Samaritan would pass. You wouldn't believe how long I sat on the side of the road before seeing headlights. I waved my arms as the car approached, but it zoomed past me, ignoring me. This happened again after another 10 minutes or so. I was starting to feel hopeless, like maybe I should just sleep in my car and wait till sunrise to get help. So that's what I was going to do. I got inside my car, took the key out of the ignition to cut the battery, and just angled my seat back to go to sleep. I would hear the occasional car zooming past, like once every 10 minutes, but it didn't feel worth waving people down in the dark. It seemed sketchy for myself and to the people in the cars. But when I was starting to actually drift away to sleep, a car door closing from behind me woke me up. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw a car pulled up behind me with its headlights off. I turned around now to get a better look. There was some big pickup truck, but I couldn't see anyone inside of it, nor did I see anyone outside of it. Maybe someone pulled over to help. I got out of the car and said, "Excuse me," to no response. I walked closer to the truck just to confirm no one was inside. Then I walked back to my car. This was weird. I looked towards the trees on the side of the road. Maybe someone was pissing in the woods. I went back inside my car and locked the door. This was just too weird. Suddenly, there was a tap at my window. I jumped. I looked to see a man looking down at me into the car, smiling. I didn't do anything yet. He said, "Hey, buddy, need a hand?" I lowered the window a crack and said, "Hey, I ran out of gas." The man said, "That's quite the predicament. Step out and give me a hand with this real quick." When he said this, I thought he meant help him with a gas jug to fill up my tank or something, honestly. So I stepped out of the truck and shut the door, expecting him to lead me to his truck. But he stood there, looked down at me because he was much taller, still smiling, and said, "I need you to empty your pockets, please." It took me a second to process what he meant. I was literally a broke college student driving a piece of pickup truck. I wasn't about to get robbed of the only cash I had in my phone. I ran for it in the direction of the trees. I'm small but fast. I turned around and saw he was chasing after me. Once I made it into the trees, I zigzagged all over the place until I seemed to lose him. Then I crouched behind a big tree to catch my breath. When I heard him approaching closer, I quieted my breath. I heard him say out loud, "I'll kill you, you piece of." I don't know if he was just saying it out loud out of anger or if he wanted me to hear it, but I was too scared to move. Even after I heard his footsteps move away, I didn't move. In fact, I stayed in this position the rest of the night, eventually laying behind this big tree up until dawn. I went back over to the highway to my truck, and the truck behind me was gone, but my truck's doors were both open. I found that my glove box had been gone through and completely emptied of anything somewhat valuable. My flannel hoodie was also taken, which had something in the pocket, I'm sure. I finally managed to wave down a good Samaritan, and he gave me a ride to the closest gas station. I bought a fuel can, filled it with gas, and the man brought me back to my car, where I filled my tank just enough to drive the truck to a gas station to fill up completely. Then I went straight home. This was a real-life learning experience for me, that there are bad people out there who will try to take advantage of you when you're in a vulnerable spot. But there are also good people, like the man who helped me. We started in New Jersey, where we're from, and made our way west. It was a great time. We saw stuff that we always talked about seeing. After day 3, we finally hit the dreaded boring part of the drive, Nebraska. Nothing but cornfields as far as the eye can see. It was about 6:30 p.m., and the sun was starting to set. I looked at the gas gauge, and it read 1/4 of a tank. I told my buddy we should start looking for a gas station. He checked the GPS, and nothing for at least 100 miles showed up. I started to get nervous because the last thing we need is to run out of gas in the middle of Nebraska with literally nothing around at night. That's how horror movies start. Finally, as we crested a small hill, my fears, at least for the time being, were put to rest. Down the road, maybe half a mile, we saw a blue sign that said, "Gas next exit." Little did I know that the next exit was another 30 miles away. So we drove and drove, all the while with one eye on the gauge. Finally, we saw the exit and got off. The gas light on the dashboard came on, warning us we had less than a gallon left. The sign pointed to the right at the end of the exit ramp and said 10 miles gas. The car we were driving was a 200 Ford Explorer. Being an old SUV, I knew it barely got 14 miles to the gallon on a good day. I shared a look with my friend, we both shrugged. I made the turn, and we continued on. The sun had now gone down, and for those of you who have never been to the Midwest at night, it's not like being in the city. When the sun goes down, there is no ambient light whatsoever. No street lights, no lights from a major city giving off the comfortable orange glow, nothing. Just an endless darkness in all directions. Even the highway offered no lights. I turned on the high beams and could barely see 50 feet in front of me. My spider sense was tingling at this point, but we pressed on. What other choice did we have? Minutes passed, but they felt like hours. I kept my eyes peeled for any possible animals that might dart out in front of me. Suddenly, the car started to shudder. My friend and I both shared an "oh, look" as we started going up another hill. The car barely made it up and crested the hill. As we did, we saw our salvation, lights from a gas station. If I had only known what was going to happen next, I would have gotten out of the car and run back to the interstate. We rolled down the hill and entered what I can only describe as a ghost town. There were buildings, shops, and houses, every single one of them boarded up. There was one exception, a church set opposite the station. One of those old ones you would usually see in New York or Paris. It appeared to be sandstone with a huge steeple. It looked like it was brand new, with a nicely manicured lawn and a huge red wooden door. The stained glass windows that lined the outside had pictures telling a story. However, instead of telling the story of the Stations of the Cross or the Virgin Mary, as most churches had, these showed depictions of people burning in fire, their faces twisted in agony under the cloven hoof of what I could only think was the devil. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. Something here just didn't feel right. The car died about 500 feet from the gas station, so we got out and pushed it the rest of the way. As we got out, I heard something barely audible, almost like a humming, coming from the church. My buddy didn't hear anything, so I assumed I must just be tired. The pump was new, with one of the credit card readers. Which struck me as odd, considering everything else in this town, save the church, looked like it hadn't had anyone living in it for at least 30 years. We filled up without incident, and as we finished, the sound, which now sounded like a humming droning, got louder. We got back into the car and left. The road we came in on was a one-way, so the only way out was to go further into the town and hopefully find a road that led back to the interstate. As we drove, We saw more light being reflected off the buildings. We pulled into a town square where there was a huge stage and hundreds of chairs set up for what looked like a concert of some sort. The light was coming from a bonfire in the center of the audience area. As we pulled further into the square, we could see a guy playing music for no one. There wasn't one person in any of the seats. I used to work in the music industry. I know a sound check when I see one. Usually, that happens before the concert, so a musician can check his or her sound with the guy running the soundboard. With no one around, this was not it. He was covered in sweat, screaming his music and playing almost like his life depended on it. We came to a T intersection and a stop sign. We had the windows down because it was summer and we were trying to save gas by not using the AC. The droning humming I heard had gotten louder. It was almost like it was in my head, beating my brain. Now it sounded like it was coming from the buildings themselves. It got louder and louder. The guy playing music screamed even louder, almost like he was fighting the sound. Then a whole lot of things happened at once. The humming reached fever pitch and then stopped abruptly. The bonfire went out. The guy on stage stopped playing. Down on the right of the road, which looked like it was the only way back to the highway, came a mob of people with pitchforks, boards, rocks, and one guy had what looked like a samurai sword. Looking back now, I remember thinking it strange that no one had a gun considering where we were. They came running towards us, screaming and waving their weapons. My buddy and I covered our heads in anticipation of the beating of our lives. They started pounding on the car, even going so far as to break one of the little windows in the back seat. I threw the car in four-wheel drive and slammed the accelerator. The car lurched forward, plastering a few people onto the windshield, but ultimately we broke through the mob. The ones who weren't knocked down from the impact of the car started storming the stage. They jumped onto it and started assaulting the musician with their weapons, his screams echoing off the derelict buildings. I didn't waste any time. I slammed on the gas pedal, cut the wheel, and sped out down the road to the right, the whole time with my friend screaming obscenities. We got back to the highway and drove for another 30 miles until we hit our destination for the night, where our hotel was. We got into our room, trying to make sense of what we had just seen. As I put my bags down, I looked at my friend and he looked at me. We both agreed to go to the police in the morning, as it was now about 3 a.m. The next day, we woke up, packed our overnight bags, and went out to our car. We immediately drove to the police department and asked to speak to a detective, as we had a crime to report. A small bald man from a desk stood up and invited us to come and sit with him. We then proceeded to tell him the whole thing. When we were finished, he asked us, pale as a ghost, "Did you tell anyone else this?" We, of course, responded in the negative, to which he replied, "Good. Keep it that way." With his hands shaking, he showed us the door, and we left. We never spoke of it to anyone else. When I was 29 years old, I'd saved enough money to buy my first house. It wasn't anything special, and honestly, all things considered, it wasn't in the best neighborhood either. But I was still proud of the accomplishment nonetheless. I'd met all the nearby neighbors within the first 2 weeks I moved in. Considering the neighborhood, I was surprised to discover they all actually seemed pretty nice. A couple of them even invited me over for dinner a few times, and having lived in different apartments all my life, this wasn't really something I was used to. Of course, they weren't all like this. However, 2 houses down from the house I moved into lived a man that was probably 50 years old. Upon moving in, every other night or so, the dude would knock at my front door at some absurd hour asking for stuff. For example, the first time it happened, he asked me to find any spare bread I wasn't going to eat. Another time, he asked me if I could fill up a bucket with water because his was turned off. It was just random but somewhat understandable things like that. But I drew the line when he started asking me for money. I figured I had no obligation to be constantly meeting this guy's needs. I mean, I had pretty much just met the dude. I started opening the door to his knocks less and less, but this didn't seem to have any effect on the number of times he would show up. Fast forward to a night a few weeks later, and again, another knock. I planned to ignore it like I'd grown accustomed to doing by that point, but as I looked through the peephole, I noticed the guy looked distressed. Seeing this, I decided the right thing to do would be to open up the door. So I did. I asked him what he needed, and what he responded with was not at all the type of response I was expecting. He asked me if I could come over and show him how to use his new grill. Now, this happened around midnight, which in my opinion was an extremely odd time to start grilling. But against my better judgment, I decided I would help him. I was pretty into cooking at that point in my life and figured taking 10 minutes to show the guy how a grill worked wouldn't be the end of the world. I told him that I'd be over in a second and that I just needed to put some shoes on. He thanked me and started walking back. A couple of minutes later, I made my way over to his house. I opened some gate and walked into his backyard. It was dark, so it was hard to see, but it was clear there was no grill. On top of that, the guy was nowhere in sight, although his back door was wide open. I stuck my head inside and yelled out for the guy. "Yeah, I'm down here. I need your help getting some meat from the freezer." The muffled response came from down a set of stairs just to the left of me. I was hesitant to go down. There were no lights on down there. In fact, there wasn't a single light on throughout the whole house. I yelled down the stairs, asking him if he could turn on a light so I could see. There was silence for a few seconds. Eventually, he responded, "No, they're broken. I can't do that." I knew something was off at that point. I yelled back something like, "I think I'm just gonna go, man." I kid you not, the second after I said this, audible footsteps started sprinting up the stairs. My flight reaction kicked in immediately. I ran directly back to my house and locked the door behind me. I pulled back a set of curtains and looked out one of my windows, but I didn't see anything. I was terrified. I thought about calling the police, but decided against it, figuring I really wouldn't be able to prove anything that just happened. For the next few days, I didn't leave my house for anything except work. During those days, I never saw the guy nor did any late-night knocks occur. Exactly 1 week after it happened, I was talking with my neighbor across the street. The conversation eventually landed on what I experienced and how I was planning to move because of it. But I was just met with a look of confusion. I was then informed that no one lived in the house I was talking about. It had been abandoned for 2 years. This prompted my neighbor to call the police. However, the police would find nothing inside or around the house. I moved out a few weeks later, so that's all I know. I'm not sure if anything else came from the situation or not. I still don't know who that guy was or what he was trying to lure me into. About 3 months ago, I moved into an apartment with 2 other women so I could attend college. There's a list of things that make the building we live in not that great. For example, most apartment rooms face the corridor where people from the same floor as you will constantly walk left and right to get in or out of the building. So if you keep your windows open, anyone pacing outside can see into your room. But considering I spend most of my time at college, and the girls I live with and most of the neighbors are really nice, the things on that list don't really bother me that much. A few nights ago, while getting ready to go to bed, I could hear music playing from somewhere, mostly pop songs from the 2000s. Since we live in a student-friendly city full of frat houses and the like, I thought nothing of it. There were probably a bunch of parties going on, and the sound was coming from one of them. Or maybe it was just some drunk friends listening to it on the street. I got into bed and let a random video play on my phone so I could fall asleep, as I often do. But as I was starting to doze off, I started to hear drilling noises. At first, I thought I was just sleepy and hearing things, or maybe it was coming from my phone. But I paused the video and listened closely. There was definitely someone using a drill somewhere nearby. I got up and walked around the apartment, feeling confused. It was around 10:30 p.m., so there was no way that someone could be working still. The sound was louder at my bedroom window, so I opened it to check and quickly realized that it was coming from the neighboring apartment, the one that's closest to my window. At that moment, I realized that music was also coming from there. No one lives in that specific apartment, so my confusion only grew. But then I figured maybe someone had planned to rent it, talked it over with the landlord, and he ordered for something in it to be fixed. Still, the fact that they were doing it so late into a Thursday felt really strange. I went back to trying to sleep, but they wouldn't stop making noise. I was texting a friend and eventually started complaining about it, sending him audios and even a video directed at the window that all the noise was coming from. He said I should call the police because there was no way it was legal for someone to be doing this, especially in a building full of apartments. I decided against it since I just wanted to get some rest, and it was already past midnight by then. I forced myself to sleep through the drilling sounds, but a little past 1 o'clock in the morning, I woke up again, this time to hammering. Feeling stressed, but not enough to take action just yet, I tried to sleep once more, only to wake up again. This time, I didn't even check what time it was. I was totally fed up, so I just put on a robe and made my way to confront whoever it was. The window to the apartment was open, so I decided to talk to those people from there. The window was located above the stairs, though, so I would have to go down a few steps to get into view, and I'd look even shorter being seen from there. But that was the last thing on my mind. As soon as I got to the window, I felt most of the courage leave me. In that room, there were 4 men who all seemed to be around their 30s or 40s, and they all stopped whatever they were doing to look at me. Now only the song coming from the radio could be heard, and somehow it felt chilling to have all those other noises stop so abruptly. Even though that's everything I wanted just seconds earlier, I definitely didn't want to be the one thing these 4 men were focused on. Another thing that bothered me, but I didn't think about until the next day, was those men's peculiar choice of music. It just felt creepy to realize that middle-aged men were listening to stuff that teenagers or even preteens would be listening to. Anyway, none of them looked shocked to see me. They just had puzzled looks. Remembering why I was there in the first place, I said, "Excuse me, it's pretty late and most people here have work early in the morning. If it's not too much to ask, can you guys do this some other time?" Now, mind you, I'm a pretty short and puny 19-year-old who didn't even think to put on something other than a robe. So when 2 of those 40-something-year-old men came to the window and towered over me, looking up and down at my body almost like predators, I froze up and felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. They were both sweaty and had their mouths agape, and one of them had a hammer that looked quite heavy in his hand. They started smiling in a sick, twisted way, and I felt a sudden urge to throw up. Extremely unsettled, I started slowly making my way back to my apartment, not taking my eyes off the men, feeling like they might try to grab me. When I got to the last step of the stairs and close enough to the window, as soon as I was out of their view, I dashed to my front door, got inside, and locked it. One of the girls who lives with me was out of town that night, and I presumed the other one was asleep since she hadn't seen my text on our group chat asking them if anyone had moved into that apartment. I got back into my room and didn't hear any tools again. In reality, even the radio seemed to have been turned off. I wasn't really sure how to feel about that because now I wasn't angry, just disgusted and creeped out. I know I should have called the cops by then, but I was just too stressed to deal with that any longer. Checking the time, it was about 2:15 now. I got into bed again, tricking myself into thinking I wasn't scared, just craving some sleep. Eventually, I passed out. I woke up in the middle of the night again. This time it was around 3 o'clock, and I could hear no sounds coming from the apartment. Everything was quiet, and that quickly started to bother me. It was too quiet. I had to have heard or felt something in order to wake up. The silence was making me uneasy, and I had a feeling that someone might have been on the other side of my closed window. I tried not to think about it, but I couldn't get a peaceful sleep after that. The next morning, as I was going out, I went past the same window and noticed that it was closed. It was as if this previous night had never even happened. But I asked the girl who was home with me if she heard anything. She said she had woken up several times during the night but couldn't get up and do something about it due to sleep paralysis. Either way, that confirmed I wasn't delusional, those people really were there. But then how did they have the keys to the building and that apartment? Why did it seem like they didn't want to be seen during the day? What were they thinking of doing to me or maybe any passerby? It's been a week now, and thankfully I haven't seen those men again. Still, I have no idea who they were or what they were doing, and I'm honestly scared to even think about the possibility that they might come back or still be lurking around. One day when I was only 17 or so, my older sister and I were hanging outside together in the backyard. Our mom was probably upstairs reading or cleaning or something. My dad wasn't there, and I don't know where he was, probably work or something. I was on my phone, just scrolling through Instagram, lying down on the trampoline. My sister Ava was on the swing set, probably just doing the same thing I was doing. We would occasionally say something to each other about the videos we saw on our For You page, and we would send them to each other and laugh or whatever. Until we were interrupted by our neighbor Bella. We weren't super close with her, but my parents were, and my mother and she got along very well. "Hey guys, come here," she said, standing in her backyard where the fence met the middle of our property lines. We confusingly walked over to her as we had no idea what she wanted, but we knew to respect our elders, so we had to see what she was calling us for. She told us that we needed to go inside and get our mom and that she already called the police. What are you talking about?" my sister asked. "Just trust me. No time to explain right now. Please, just do as I say, guys," said Bella. "You guys are in danger. Run," she said. "Someone dangerous is lurking around your front yard." We reluctantly but also quickly scattered inside after that. We told our mom, and she looked outside, and there was a man on our front doorstep. I didn't recognize him at first as his head was shaved completely bald, but it was our old neighbor. Long story short, a few weeks before this, our neighbor was arrested for killing his wife and daughter, which I didn't know at this point, by the way. I'll get back to that later. My mom saw who it was and ordered us to run up to her room and to lock the door and to only open it if she asks, so we did. We were terrified, but we had to listen to our mom. We ran upstairs and we were waiting. My sister was crying, and I was trying to calm her down. Just by how freaked out Mom was, we both knew something was very wrong, and we were dying to know what was happening. After a few more minutes, our mom screamed and we heard glass shattering. Luckily, she was close to the stairs already and she was able to get to the room with us before the man grabbed her. We locked the door and put a dresser in front of it to buy us some time. This man was screaming like nobody's business that he was going to kill us and pounding on the door for over 5 minutes. Suddenly, it stopped. We heard police sirens in the distance and the man tried to run away. The cops almost had a shootout with him, but after some screaming and threatening, he finally subdued and was taken back to prison. So, this guy we're talking about is named Brian. He was charged with at least 2 counts of first-degree murder for killing his family. Like I said earlier, it was said that he escaped prison about 2 hours before this, and he wanted to come back to get revenge on my family. He was convinced that my father was the reason he got arrested. Brian thought he was going to walk away scot-free for killing his family, but he was under the impression that my dad snitched him out somehow. I'm not sure why he thinks that, as I don't know the whole story. My father won't talk to me about it, not that it matters anyway. I guess my mom and dad didn't tell me or my sister about what happened next door at first, but they said they were planning on it soon. They just didn't want us to freak out, supposedly. But that's about all I can get out of my dad about everything. Not even my mom knows the full story, unless she's lying to us. My parents probably thought there was no urgency to tell us what happened next door since he was locked away in prison at the time. But somehow, he escaped and was looking for revenge. Hopefully, they have him under control in there this time. It was personal, and he escaped just to try and murder us. When I was in middle school, I was desperate for friends. I tried to talk to anyone that would let me sit with them, but nobody ever seemed to like me enough to keep me around, or they would just be mean to me. That's why, when the 2 prettiest, most popular girls in school, Azure and Alita, invited me to a sleepover with them, I was thrilled. I had tried sitting with them at lunch a few times before, but they always told me to go away because they were busy talking about something that wasn't my business. Then, on the last day of school one year, they both came up to me while I was sitting by myself. They said they really wanted to hang out with me over the summer but didn't want other people to see us hanging out together while we were still in school. Even as a naive and lonely middle schooler, I knew that was a severely underhanded invite, but I accepted it with enthusiasm anyway. I would take what I could get, and they knew it. Of course, my mom was just glad I was finally starting to hang out with other kids, and she gladly gave me permission to go, especially when I said that Azure's mom offered to serve all 3 of us dinner. When I got there, it was about 8 p.m., and I was already dressed in my pajamas. Alita and Azure were still fully dressed. When I asked if we were still going to have dinner together, Azure said that they had just finished eating right before I got there. Then Alita said I didn't need to eat so much anyway. They were already putting me down, but I wanted to be friends with them so badly that I let them do it. After I said hi to Azure's mom, who was already wine drunk and ready for us to not be her problem anymore, we all went up to Azure's room upstairs. It was a Jack and Jill style bedroom with her own bathroom and another bedroom on the other side. I asked Azure who was in the other room, but she snapped at me and said it was her older sister and told me not to be so nosy. I apologized profusely, but they just told me to be quiet because my voice was annoying. Azure had a bunch of awesome stuff in her room, from Taylor Swift posters to expensive makeup and giant stuffed animals, things that my mom couldn't afford to get me. But as much as I wanted to ask her about it, I knew she wouldn't like that, so I just looked at the floor. We started to play Truth or Dare, which Alita and Azure used to mine all sorts of information about me, including who I had a crush on and how much money my parents made. I told them everything honestly, only for them to laugh in my face every time. Whenever I asked them to tell the truth about something, they made up a bunch of ridiculous stuff that I knew was a lie, but of course, I wasn't going to call them out on it. When I finally got sick and tired of having to spill all my beans, I told them to dare me to do something. As soon as I said that, Alita and Azure looked at each other with the most wicked smiles, like they had been waiting for me to say that the whole time. Then Azure dared me to go into the bathroom and play the Bloody Mary game. I didn't know what it was at the time, and when I admitted this, they both screamed in disbelief that I didn't know who Bloody Mary was. They explained it to me and said I had to do it or I would have to leave the sleepover. I wanted to stay, so I stepped inside the bathroom. Azure and Alita lit a candle in front of the mirror, then they turned off the lights and shut the door. "You have to say it loud and clear," Azure teased me from the other side. "If you don't, we'll know." I was shaking. I had no idea what would happen. Was this Bloody Mary someone that could really be summoned? Would she really kill me if she came? I didn't know, but the only thing that pushed me forward was the need to be accepted and the belief that things like ghosts didn't exist. I looked at myself in the mirror, took a deep breath, and said, "Bloody Mary," 3 times slowly. For a moment, nothing happened. I looked behind my reflection, and there was nothing, until I saw a woman crawling out of the bathtub behind me. I screamed and turned around, and I realized it was real. There was a real bloody woman sitting in the shower. Her skin was gray, like she was dead, and her clothes were torn up. But her eyes were open, and she was looking right at me. Slowly, the woman stepped out of the tub and started walking toward me. I was so petrified I couldn't move. I wanted to, but it was like my legs had turned to stone. With every step she took, she left a trail of blood. Soon, she was right in front of me. I screamed again, but she grabbed me by the throat and lifted me up to my tiptoes. She opened her mouth and revealed a gaping jaw full of blood and blackness, inching toward my neck like she was going to take a bite out of it. I couldn't maintain control of myself, so in that moment, I peed my pants. But then, at the last second, the door swung open and the lights turned on. "What's going on in here?" Azure asked. "Why are you screaming?" I could barely get a word out through my stuttering teeth, but I managed what I could. "Bloody Mary was here," I said. "She was right in front of me. I saw her, and it was real. She grabbed me and everything, and she tried to kill me." Alita and Azure said, almost in unison, "What?" They looked all around the bathroom, but of course, she was gone. "Stop acting crazy," said Alita. "You're just begging for attention." "Honestly, it's kind of embarrassing," Azure snickered and agreed. "Wait, did you pee yourself?" "That's disgusting," Alita exclaimed. "Oh my God, so yeah, actually, I think if you're going to act like that, you just have to leave." "What? Why?" I asked in disbelief. But before I knew it, Azure and Alita dragged me out of the bathroom and pushed me down the stairs, then threw all my stuff at me. I crawled to Azure's mother, a sobbing mess, and begged her to call my mom. Based on the look in her eyes and the way she sighed, I think she was very close to just letting me cry myself to sleep on the ground. But thankfully, She had the basic decency to call my mother so I could get out of that awful house. I never fully explained to my mother what happened, except for the fact that they were so mean that I cried. I hid the bruises from being pushed down the steps, and I wore turtlenecks for the next few weeks to hide the bruises on my neck. That was how my summer vacation began that year. Needless to say, I never left the house again until school was back in session. As for Bloody Mary, Azure and Alita's gaslighting was so effective on me that I honestly believed she existed for over 2 years after that. Until one day, I told this story to my first real friend in high school, and they explained to me the obvious truth that it was just Azure's older sister in a convincing costume. I'm a cemetery operations coordinator, or you can just call me a cemetery manager. Part of my job is sitting down with guests and family members of the deceased to set up funerals, facilitate the sales of plots. A 30-something-year-old man named Claude, a very spiritual man, once sat down with me to purchase a plot for his sick father who was in hospice care. Claude was a Hispanic man with a very thick accent, and I saw in his eyes he was a very caring man. He showed me pictures of his father, who also looked like a very sweet man, much too young to be taken away from his family. Unfortunately, the man's time came that same week, and Claude arranged for his father's funeral service at the cemetery. It was a very stormy day, the day of the funeral, which is thought to be a sign of good luck. The funeral procession stopped in front of the front office building briefly. I stepped outside under the front awning of the building and saw Claude in the car behind the hearse. We waved at each other. Due to the weather, I went back inside until the procession was ready to proceed to the burial site. I got in one of the cemetery pickup trucks and followed the procession to the final stop where I would stand with my umbrella, supervising, as part of my job is making sure funeral services go smoothly. After the funeral, I did some laps around the place in the truck just to survey the area, as I did at least a couple times a day. I had a lot of paperwork to take care of, and on top of this, I had to close the cemetery that night. So, a little later, I went back to my desk and took care of this. The cemetery closes at 5:30, so as soon as it started to get dark, I drove around the place one more time to ensure all visitors had left, then drove over to the front gate to shut it. It was a relatively warm early March. The days were still on the shorter side, so by closing time on a normal day, it would already be getting darker, but on this stormy day, it already felt like it was nighttime. I was driving back to my office when I thought I saw someone hurriedly walking down one of the lanes of tombstones before turning behind a hedge and disappearing out of sight. I beeped my horn to let them know the place was closed, but strangely enough, I didn't see them again. I grabbed my umbrella and ran out into the rain in that direction. I turned beyond the hedge they turned at and looked down this long row of tombstones on one side and hedges on the other. I didn't see anyone. I looked around in the rain for a solid 20 minutes, but eventually, I had to give up. I drove back up to the office and browsed through the CCTV footage. None of it picked up any unusual movement, even though it was a bit harder to see much because of the storm, and it was also pitch black outside now. I tried to multitask, keeping an eye on the camera while finishing up some of my paperwork, when I heard the front door to the visitation room slammed shut. I sprang up from my chair and yelled, "Hello." My first thought was that it was the same person I saw before. Maybe they got locked in the cemetery and were looking for assistance in leaving. I stepped out into the lobby, but no one was there. I looked around and again said, "Hello." Maybe the door slamming shut was them leaving. I started looking out all the windows, and I stopped when, through one of them, I saw someone on the other side looking back at me with a blank expression. I jumped back and screamed, and they didn't flinch. I stepped closer and made a squinty-eyed, confused look when I realized I recognized this Hispanic, older-looking man. In my head, it reminded me exactly of the pictures of Claude's father he showed me. With my heart in my throat, I ran out the front door of the building and to the side where I saw the man, but he was gone. He wasn't booking it into the fields, he wasn't hiding in a bush nearby, he was gone. I looked around me as I stood in the rain getting soaked, then ran back inside, packed up my things, locked up, and got in my car. I opened and closed the gate once more, locking it behind me, and drove home. When my wife asked me at home why I was being so quiet, I just told her it was a long day at work. To this day, I think I was just overworking myself, and my mind was playing tricks on me, but it still is genuinely disturbing to think about. Foreign off this chick that was a little unstable to say the least. She'd probably kill me if she heard what I was about to say using her real name, so for my own sake, I'm going to refer to her as Jane. To make a long backstory short, she came from a messed up family, and her dad was sort of at the center of a lot of her problems. When he finally died, she told me she went to the funeral just so she could find out where he was buried. A few days later, in the middle of the night, Jane called to ask me to take her to the cemetery to smash his gravestone. Although that was something I would never do to anyone, no matter how much I hated them, I could understand why Jane would want to do something like that against her father's memory. She didn't have a license, so I picked her up and we drove to the cemetery. When I parked the car in the visitor lot outside, she pulled a hammer and a handful of grocery bags out of her purse. She said she just wanted to go in, smash it up into a bunch of small pieces, bag it up, and leave. Obviously, I knew that we were breaking at least one law by trespassing into the cemetery after dark, but this was all right with me. I just told her I would keep an eye out for anyone in the area while she did what she needed to do. On that note, we got out and hurried over to the grave. Jane knew exactly where it was, so it took us no time at all, but I was still extremely nervous about the whole thing. It wasn't just the threat of being arrested, but the vibe of the cemetery itself. I really felt like I wasn't supposed to be there, like we were disturbing all those dead people by marching through in the middle of the night. I kept my hat on straight and tried to give Jane space. At first, she spent a minute kneeling on top of the relatively fresh grave, whispering a bunch of curses and crying just from the sheer intensity of whatever emotion she was feeling. But then, without warning, she started screaming and striking the headstone. The first time caught me so off guard that it sent chills through my whole body. I spun around and was about to tell her to quiet down, but at first glance, I knew she wasn't going to hear me. She was going absolutely berserk on this stone, screaming and wailing at the top of her lungs. Each time she hit it with the hammer, only a small piece would break off. I realized we were going to be there for a while if it went on at this pace, and she was making so much god-awful noise I was terrified that somebody in the nearby neighborhood would hear us. I also thought about how blood-curdling it would feel to be walking by the graveyard and hear Jane's banshee-like shrieking in the distance, and to be unsure if she was like a ghost or a serial killer or something. My instincts set in and I became more concerned about my own safety than anything else. Here was this completely unhinged, crazy person violently thrashing her way through a mixture of grief and unhealed trauma, seeing red with total tunnel vision, and I was alone with her, surrounded by darkness and dead people. I was worried that if I got near her, she would forget it was me and think I was the ghost of her father and start trying to kill me or something, so I backed away. However, it wasn't long before the deep-seated rage within Jane started to wear off a bit and she became tired. She then stopped and looked at the progress she had made. 2/3 of the headstone was still intact, but she was already exhausted. That's when she looked back at me, and for the first time, I saw the look of unveiled insanity in Jane's eyes. I'd always known Jane had a few screws loose, but this was next level crazy. All her movements were sudden and jarring. She stood and shoved the hammer into my chest, telling me to take it and finish the job. I protested at first, not wanting to get roped further into what I thought was Jane's thing she needed to do, but as soon as I did, she grabbed me by the ears and yanked my head down so that my face was less than an inch away from hers. She then screamed so loud that it practically ruptured my eardrums. She demanded that I break the gravestone for her, or she'd use the hammer on me and bury my body next to her father's. Seeing that I was in too deep to back out, I reluctantly accepted the task and committed myself to making short work of it. Of course, I was stronger than Jane, but I wasn't nearly as uninhibited. What happened next, though, made me all the more sure that I shouldn't have tried to fight her or anything. As I was hacking away at the stone, managing to break off bigger pieces, she was standing behind me laughing like an absolute maniac. She was cheering me on the way I imagine a witch would encourage another witch to their first human sacrifice. I tried my best to ignore her, but it was impossible. I glanced over my shoulder and saw that she had pulled out a knife, which sent another chill down my spine. Before I knew it, she knelt behind me and straddled my back, throwing her arms over my shoulders, whispering little pure evil into my ears. I froze up and stopped swinging the hammer because I didn't want to hit her. She told me I was almost done. Then she did something I'll never forget. Both of her hands were out in front of me, one of which held the knife right before my eyes. She put the blade to her palm and sliced it open, creating a fountain of blood which quickly spilled down her wrist. Then she whispered some kind of satanic blessing in tongues and smeared her bloody hand over my face, from my forehead down to my chin, then across my throat until she finally rested her hand with a vice grip at the base of my neck. She asked me if I could taste the blood, and I said I could. She took pleasure in this, and then she finally let go of me to stand on the grave again. Then she screamed out at the top of her lungs that these would be the final tears she would ever cry over her father. As she looked up into the night sky with her eyes open, she put her hand up to the moon and clenched her fist, squeezing the wound to form drops of blood which fell down upon her eyes and face. I watched this whole thing, stunned out of my mind, until she looked back at me with her face full of bloody tears and growled at me to finish the job. Of course, I was thoroughly terrified of Jane by this point and I was ready to leave. I just did as she said. At last, when the whole thing was smashed to bits, I convinced Jane that we needed to go. Thankfully, she seemed ready, but the entire time we were picking up the pieces and bagging them, she was giggling. When it was all cleaned up, we ran back to my car, somehow going through this whole entire ordeal without anyone seeing us or calling the cops on us. I drove Jane back home and I dropped her off. As she got out of my car, she tried to drag me out to spend the night with her. I'd been waiting for that night for months, but by then I knew where that would go. I knew it would be no good for me, so I made up some excuse about having to work the next day in the morning. I cut off all contact and I've been avoiding her out of fear ever since. This story did not personally happen to me, but it happened to my father. It takes place approximately 3 years ago near the Stones River battlefield in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. My parents are divorced, and my dad lives in an apartment with a roommate. At the time, my dad was a truck driver. On this particular night, he was driving back home, driving along Stones River battlefield, which was a battlefield during the Civil War. My dad is a history buff, and he often took me and my siblings there since it was a spot he enjoyed visiting. On this night, However, it changed his perspective about this historical landmark. As my dad drove down the road, he saw a group of people waiting to cross the street. But as he got closer, he realized that this group of people were all dressed as Civil War soldiers. My dad's initial thought, of course, was that they were reenactors, not giving any thought as to why they were doing a reenactment this late at night. Maybe they were practicing. He didn't know for sure and didn't even think about it. When my dad approached, he stopped his truck and let them cross the street. But what he saw next terrified him greatly. One of the soldiers had stopped and looked at my dad with cold black eyes and a ghostly pale face. My dad was spooked and just sat there in shock until the soldiers had crossed the street and disappeared like mist on the wind. My father drove the rest of the way home, trying to piece it together and keep his sanity intact. He had no idea what he had just witnessed. He then told me some things that had happened after that, things that scare me more than anything. He told me as he got home, he was video chatting with someone on Skype, and at one point in the night, he got up to go do something, so he left his room. When he returned, the person he was chatting with on the video call asked him something strange. They asked, "Was the person walking around in your kitchen your roommate?" My dad's roommate was gone for the night, and my dad's apartment is very small, so if someone had broken in, they wouldn't be hard to find. My dad began to freak out, immediately thinking that one of the ghost soldiers he saw had followed him home. For the longest time, my dad wasn't a believer in the paranormal, not until this experience. He even discovered that around that area and the battlefield, there were common ghost sightings. So just remember, if you're ever driving by the Stones River battlefield, be careful, as these spirits may follow you back to your place, and they may not be as tame as the ones that followed my father. My husband Jack is in the military. We have generally lived on base at every station we have been to because the surrounding towns can be very crime-ridden and sketchy, and with my husband gone most of the time, the extra security is appreciated. I work from home due to us moving so often. One afternoon, I was taking a break, had made a bite to eat, and was snuggling up on the couch with my dog. That's when I heard the sliding glass door open. It was so nonchalant I thought it was Jack. I saw the cat run from the kitchen and a shadow standing near the door entering it. I thought maybe he had come back for something, so I called out for him and was like, "What are you doing home? Did you forget something?" No answer. This is where I just got an eerie feeling. After I asked what he was doing here, I saw the shadow move and heard the click of the sliding door lock. From there, he walked to the laundry room and shut the door. I still had received no response, so I'm sitting on the couch, scared out of my mind, and I call my husband, hoping to hear his phone in the laundry room. I don't hear a ring, but he does answer. I asked him why he came home, and he didn't answer me. All he says is, "That wasn't me. Grab the dog and get in your car." I freak out. After getting off the phone with Jack, I grab the dog and run to my car. From there, I called the military police. Waiting for them was probably the longest 20 minutes of my life. When they got there, they cleared the house and found no one. They asked me to make a statement, and even they were baffled that someone would try this on a base. We still live here. I'm just so scared that he'll come back. I've been a night owl my whole life, so I work night shifts exclusively. I really don't work well with other people, whether they're my coworkers or not, so I picked a job I could do completely on my own. I became a nighttime janitor for my local school district after I graduated from high school. Schools have always had nightly cleaning as part of health codes in most areas, but obviously, in recent years, it's become much more important. My first job was in a fairly large K through 12 school. There were a couple of daytime custodians as well, but at night it was just me and one other person splitting the school down the middle. My coworker and I barely ever interacted, which I appreciated a lot. Every single night, all the floors get mopped or vacuumed, every desk, table, and door handle is disinfected, and every toilet, urinal, and sink also gets cleaned. It takes a full 8-hour shift to accomplish, and for that entire time, I don't talk to a single person. It's great, honestly. Most of my coworkers are women, and they don't want me talking to them either. When I tell people about my job, a lot of them think the hardest part is cleaning up after the messes left by the students. For the most part, I guess they are right, but I always tell them I would rather plunge and clean 10 clogged and traumatized toilets every single night than ever have to work directly with another human being all day long, especially a horde of minors. These days, there's one example I give of why I say that. It was the night after Halloween. I came in for my usual shift and got started without even saying hello to my coworker. We started on opposite ends and met in the middle, so we would only see each other when we were finishing up. The first hour was mostly normal except for one obvious thing out of the ordinary. I always keep my music at a low volume on my headphones, but from outside them, I kept hearing things. Usually, all the other faculty are gone by 8 p.m., but sometimes there's somebody who stays late. I couldn't decide what I was hearing through my music, but I wasn't in the mood to turn it off, so I just ignored it. A little while later, I took a break from mopping to change the water in the bucket. I was gone for about 5 minutes, but on my way back to where I stopped, I walked past one of the hallways I had just mopped and noticed the wet floor sign had fallen over. For legal reasons, I had to step over the wet floor and stand it back up, then mop back over my tracks. Annoyed, I walked over to it but froze for a moment when something else caught my eye. There was another set of tracks in the water, leading to and from the sign. They were little footprints, something a kid would make. After I stood the sign back up, I followed the tracks, knowing I would have to mop over those too, basically redoing the whole hallway. The tracks ran all the way to the end, where there was a flight of stairs up to the second floor. From there, they dried up pretty quickly. I stormed up the stairs and got to the second floor, but nobody was there. I took my phone out of my pocket and paused my music so I would be able to hear if anyone was running around. Right as I looked down, I saw a flash of movement at the end of the hallway. I also heard a bunch of footsteps echoing across the empty school, so I started making my way to the end of the hall. By the time I got there, I still couldn't see anyone, but then I heard a little kid laughing. It felt like I was in a horror movie, but at that point, I was more annoyed than scared. I stood there looking around for a few seconds until I heard a crash from the first floor. I rushed downstairs and nearly flipped my lid when I saw the mop bucket I had just refilled was knocked over. The water was spilling everywhere in a huge pool. I absolutely swore my head off as I went back to the nearest janitor's closet for a dry mop and a bunch of towels. It took me half an hour to clean up that mess and then another 15 minutes to redo the hallway that got messed up, which meant my break was down to 15 minutes. However, I was so pissed off that I walked to the other side of the school and interrupted my coworker to ask if she had been messing with me. She looked completely dumbfounded and innocent. She asked if I was all right or needed any help, but to that, I just walked away. I set up again and got back to work. Another hour passed, and I managed to make up some lost progress. I was angrily powering through it, debating in my head the whole time about what I should do. I thought about reporting it to the school or maybe just calling the police myself, but in the end, I figured I would seem crazy to everyone, just like I did to my coworker, so nothing happened. Again, until 11 o'clock, out of nowhere, the lights shut off in the whole school. It was pitch black for about 3 seconds until the emergency lights turned on, giving everything a reddish hue. It came as a shock to me, and to be honest, I was worried. I tried to tell myself it was a malfunction or maybe some kids messing around, but my mind was going to all sorts of possibilities. I had keys to the electrical room where the light switches were, and I was the closest to it, so I stopped what I was doing and marched over. I was pissed off about losing more time and missing out on my entire break. But halfway there, something pushed those concerns out of my head. I heard the most blood-curdling scream of my life, the panic shriek of my coworker echoing endlessly. I stopped in my tracks, feeling like I had just been hit by an electric shock. Seconds later, I heard the sound of a door opening really loudly, like someone was ramming through it from the inside. I hoped it was my coworker escaping and not somebody else making their way into the school. I forced myself to keep going and finally made it to the electrical room. I was right outside the door trying to find the right key when I noticed that it was already cracked open. I pushed it open slowly, afraid of what I might see, and a shape appeared in front of me, standing unnaturally in the darkness. My blood ran cold. It could have been anyone. I gave up on trying to turn on the lights and instead reached over for my phone in my pocket. However, as soon as I moved, the figure bolted forward and slammed the door in my face. I cursed and jumped back, stumbling until my back hit the wall behind me. Once I regained my balance, I started running. I wanted to leave, but for once in my life, I thought about the well-being of somebody else and ran to the other side of the school to find my coworker. After checking a few of her hallways, I finally found her mop bucket sitting alone in the middle of the floor next to a bathroom. Without hesitation, I rushed over to it, hoping not to see any evidence that she had been hurt. Nothing seemed unusual except for the fact that she was nowhere to be found. I looked all around in the dim lighting, but as far as I could tell, I was alone. But not completely alone. The sound of a laughing child echoed in the distance again, striking fear into my chest. I clutched the handle of the mop, for lack of anything else to defend myself with, and lifted it out of the bucket, holding the end of the handle out like a spear. I faced the direction of the laughter, looking down the hallway so intently I got tunnel vision. In a moment of sheer terror, someone whispered, "Hello," into my ear. I turned around and, without thinking, jabbed the handle of the mop into their chest with all my might. I heard a grunt as the person who snuck up on me hit the ground and vomited only a second later. I shouted at them to tell me who they were, but then they started to cry. I could tell they were trying to hold it back, but they couldn't. Gradually, my eyes made out what I was looking at. It was a student kneeling on the floor. Suddenly, all my fear of danger was replaced with the fear of losing my job for hitting a student. However, as things shook out over the next few days, it turned out all right. Two twins in the 9th grade and their little brother got the idea to keep the spirit of Halloween going and prank the overnighters in the school by hiding in the lockers. There was one set of lockers in the whole building that wasn't in use and had no locks or ties on them, and those kids were skinny enough to fit in there and hide. After doing their after-school activities, they managed to avoid being expelled, probably from crying a lot. The school district understood my actions and let me keep my job, but I was transferred to a different school. All in all, this is why I don't like people, especially kids. As a child, I always found attics to be mysterious places, filled with forgotten treasures and hidden secrets. But what I discovered in the attic of my childhood home would forever change my perception of those dusty, cobweb-covered spaces. It all started on a lazy summer afternoon, when my parents decided it was time to clean out the attic and rid of the clutter that had accumulated over the years. As we climbed the creaky stairs and pushed open the heavy attic door, a wave of nostalgia washed over me, mingled with a sense of trepidation at what we might find hidden in the shadows. The attic was a labyrinth of old boxes and forgotten relics, with dusty furniture and forgotten memories scattered among the cobwebs. As we began to sift through the detritus of years gone by, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that some unseen presence lurked just out of sight, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal itself. And then, as I reached the far corner of the attic, I saw it, a small, nondescript box tucked away behind a pile of old blankets. Curiosity getting the better of me, I reached out and opened the box, revealing its contents to the dim light of the attic. Inside were photographs old and yellowed with age, depicting scenes from another time. But as I looked closer, I realized that these were no ordinary photographs. They were images of my family, taken long before I was born, in a house that looked eerily similar to the one we were currently in. As I flipped through the photographs, a sense of unease settled over me, as if I was peering into a past that had been intentionally forgotten. And then, as I reached the bottom of the box, I found a photograph that sent a chill down my spine, a picture of a young boy standing in front of the same attic door, his eyes wide with fear. It was then that I realized the truth. The attic was haunted by the spirits of those who had come before, trapped in a liminal space between the past and the present. As I looked around at the dusty relics of a bygone era, I knew that I would never be able to forget the horrors that lurked within the forgotten attic of my childhood home. In the quiet town of Briarwood, nestled among the rolling hills, there stood an ancient willow tree. Its sprawling branches reached towards the sky like gnarled fingers, casting eerie shadows over the neighborhood playground. Children were warned to stay away from the tree, for it was said to be cursed. But for Audrey and her friends, curiosity overcame fear. Audrey was 7 years old when she first heard about the legend of the Whispering Willow. It was whispered among the kids at school, a tale passed down from older siblings and cousins. They said that if you stood beneath the tree at midnight and listened closely, you could hear the whispers of lost souls trapped within its ancient roots. One fateful summer evening, Audrey and her two best friends, Imelda and Patrick, decided to test the legend. Armed with flashlights and nervous laughter, they made their way to the playground where the willow stood sentinel in the moonlight. The air was thick with humidity as they approached the tree, its twisted branches swaying gently in the breeze. Audrey's heart raced in her chest as they huddled together beneath the willow's canopy. The playground was deserted, the only sounds the distant chirping of crickets. "Are you sure about this?" Imelda whispered, her voice trembling. Audrey nodded, her palms sweaty against the flashlight. "We have to do it together. On the count of 3. They took a deep breath, their anticipation palpable in the air. 1, 2, 3, Patrick exclaimed, and they switched off their flashlights, plunging themselves into darkness. For a moment, all was silent. Audrey strained her ears, hoping to catch a whisper, a murmur from the depths of the tree. Then, just as doubt began to creep in, she heard it, a soft, haunting whisper, like the rustle of leaves in the wind. It was faint at first, barely audible over the pounding of her heart, but as she listened, it grew louder, more insistent. "Help me, help me." The voice was plaintive, full of sorrow and despair. Audrey's blood ran cold as the words echoed in her mind. She could feel Imelda and Patrick tense beside her, their breaths shallow and ragged. The darkness seemed to press in around them, suffocating and oppressive. "We have to get out of here," Imelda whimpered, her voice barely above a whisper. But before they could move, something shifted in the shadows. A figure emerged from the darkness, its form indistinct and ghostly. It floated towards them, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. Audrey's scream pierced the night as the figure reached out a translucent hand, its fingers curling towards her. She stumbled backward, tripping over a gnarled root and falling hard on the ground. "Run!" Patrick shouted, grabbing Audrey's hand and pulling her to her feet. They sprinted towards the playground's exit, their hearts pounding in their chests. Behind them, the figure gave chase, its eerie whispers growing louder and more urgent. "Help me! Don't leave me!" They burst out of the playground, gasping for breath as they stumbled onto the quiet street. The figure was gone, but the echoes of its voice lingered in their minds. They never spoke of that night again, each too terrified to confront the reality of what they had experienced. The Whispering Willow remained a forbidden place, a dark reminder of the unknown terrors that lurked in the shadows. Years passed, and Audrey grew into a young woman, the memory of that night fading like a distant dream. But one summer evening, as she walked past the playground on her way home, she heard it, a soft, haunting whisper carried on the breeze. "Help me!" Audrey's blood turned to ice as she glanced towards the willow tree, its branches reaching towards the darkening sky. In that moment, she knew that some legends were born of truth, and that the Whispering Willow held secrets that were best left undisturbed. Hopefully, I don't dox myself by writing this, but I'm a graffiti artist, or as some might see it, a delinquent. I'm fine with either title. Point is, I like to spray paint, and I'm decent with a can in my hand. The tagging community is atrocious. People are unfriendly, and there's no respect between artists. Because of this, I've adopted a much more inconspicuous routine. I like tagging up quieter spots where my art likely won't be seen by other artists or the general public. Old train lines are usually a good bet since the train cars are endless, and new trains get decommissioned and left to rot on them all the time. My friend Paul likes to come with me when I tag up, even though he's not big into the whole thing himself. I welcome the company. Some people don't understand the importance of a good friend, and I think that's sad. Most of my other friends don't seem to respect my time or interests as much as he seems to. Paul and I found ourselves smoking on some nameless set of old tracks I found earlier that day on Google Maps. I'm not a big stoner myself, but he smokes a lot of weed, so I often indulge to match his vibe. It wasn't that late, maybe a little past 10 p.m. We finished a J and talked as we walked alongside the old rusty freight train. Oddly enough, there wasn't a single tag on the entire train. It must have been recently moved here. I thought excitedly that I'd get first dibs on such a good surface. I tossed Paul a can for him to mess around with, and I started doing my own thing. About 5 minutes later, I finished my first tag. I admired it for a bit before moving to the next car, then the next. About 15 minutes and 2 paint cans later, I had 3 decent tags up adjacent to one another, and I was pretty proud of myself for how they looked in combination with each other. Sorry in advance if this offends anyone, but I tend to discard my empty cans whenever they go dry. So, I flung them back the way we had come, enjoying the satisfying clattering sound a ball bearing makes when bouncing around the inside of an empty can. I then caught up with Paul, who had seemingly rolled and lit another joint, neglecting the paint I had given him. For context, the reason I'm not a big stoner is because I started getting unbearable anxiety highs much more frequently, maybe 90% of the time. In hindsight, smoking 2 J's with Paul was a borderline detrimental decision. After all, we were doing something illegal, which was already pretty anxiety-inducing. I smoked the second joint anyway, confident that I'd be okay. As soon as the final sparks floated off the J, that's when we heard it. A muffled clang from somewhere behind us rang out into the night. The two of us froze and stared into the darkness. I could feel droplets of sweat forming around my neck as adrenaline began coursing through me. I couldn't tell if the sound had come from outside of the train or from inside one of the cars. It was hard to tell which option was worse. We waited for a full minute in silence, and nothing. That's when I whipped out my phone and recorded this video. Bro, what the was this? No way, bro. You heard that? I heard that. What the, boy? Whoever made that noise picked up one of my empty paint cans and threw it at us before chasing and shouting at us. You can't really see the paint can in the video, but I swear to you that's what the first sound was. As we frantically made our escape, whoever was behind us yelled, "You better not trip, boy." A few seconds later, an actual gunshot sounded off behind us, almost causing Paul to trip and fall. It startled me so much that my finger slipped off the record button on Snapchat, and the video cut out. We bolted down the tracks until they intersected a main road and didn't stop running until we were a safe distance away. I don't think I've ever been more terrified in my entire life. It didn't help that I was stoned out of my mind. My hands were literally shaking, and so were Paul's. We found our way back to the car and drove home in silence. What was I supposed to do? Call the police? I was literally breaking the law. That wasn't an option. The story doesn't end there, though. I actually went back to those tracks a few weeks later, but this time during the day and equipped with my trusty Glock 17. To my surprise, the train was still there. Despite that, there was a pretty glaring difference this time around. In the 3 spots where my tags had previously been were now ugly blotches of red paint. Someone had deliberately covered my work. Quietly, I kept investigating and eventually came to a train car with its door wide open. I took a look inside, and it was bizarre. The train car was completely empty except for a chair in the direct center and what looked like ropes and chains scattered about. Some of the ropes were wrapped around the legs of the chair, and others were just lying on the floor. The weirdest part was the smell, though. The whole car smelled like bleach. If you closed your eyes, you would have guessed you were in a cleaning supply closet. I can't overstate the smell, though. It literally smelled like the whole train car had been doused in bleach. I went to take a picture of the scene when I thought I heard a metal clang somewhere further down the train. I could have imagined it, but I wasn't taking any chances. That was enough for me. I was out of there as quickly as I had come. I've told so many people this story, and none of them could rationalize that psycho's actions in a way that makes sense. I doubt a homeless person would be able to get their hands on a gun, but I can't fathom why someone other than a homeless person would respond so aggressively. And why they decided to cover up my tags is another mystery. I think the most disturbing aspect of this whole thing was the chair in the middle of the train car. I really want to go back to those tracks just to take a picture of what I saw, but I haven't worked up the courage to. I have no idea if whoever was there that night was really shooting to kill us or just trying to scare us, but sometimes late at night, when it's just me and my thoughts, I can still hear that shot ringing in my ears. As I write this, it's early July. This story took place at the beginning of summer. I usually try to hang around my college town or travel to Europe in the summer as a way to avoid going home, but that wasn't a possibility this time around. I found myself reluctantly returning home at the beginning of the summer. I just had to make it through 1 week, and then I'd be on a plane to Germany. I didn't really feel like seeing any of my old friends, but I wasn't too keen on staying home either. So, I found myself waking up early and spending my entire days hiking, watching movies, or even just driving around aimlessly. It was my last day home. I was getting bored of the stuff I had been doing and wanted to do something a little more exciting. My friends and I used to train hop, one of the many unruly activities that I had since cut out of my life. I decided, what the hell, and drove to a secluded set of tracks I knew about. Freight trains always passed through here, so I knew there would be many options. The tracks were surrounded by trees and various flora, part of the reason I had chosen them. The last thing I needed was to be caught for doing an illegal activity after having been clean for so many years. I parked my car and made my way over to the tracks. Let me describe the layout so it's easy to understand. This specific set of tracks ran through the trees for a while before entering a tunnel. There was a very small clearing on the other side of the tunnel and then a massive bridge over the water. My friends and I used to ride the train all the way across the bridge, but since it was just me, I would have no way of getting back to my car unless I felt like walking 10 miles. So, I decided that I'd hop on the train, take it through the tunnel, hop off, and get a peaceful walk back to my car. I walked along the tracks and waited for a train to pass. It was probably 3 or 4 in the afternoon. Finally, after about 10 minutes of walking, I started to feel the familiar vibration in the rails. I quickly ran to the side and tried my best to stay out of sight. Usually, as far as I know, freight train conductors didn't care enough to report people walking along the tracks, but I didn't want to take any chances. The train passed, and I waited for a good number of cars to go by before emerging from my hiding spot. I picked a car that looked easily attainable and began jogging alongside the train like I had done 100 times before. Once I was confident enough, I grabbed hold of the ladder and swung myself up. It was pretty easy, the train wasn't traveling very quickly. As my part of the train was about to enter the tunnel, I saw a strange flash of light from up ahead. I assumed it was a spark from the train or something, but truth be told, I had never seen anything like it before. I hoped there wasn't an errant wire or something dangerous in the tunnel, but it was too late to hop off. The train started picking up speed since the tunnel was perfectly straight, and I closed my eyes as the adrenaline rush started coming on. Just then, I felt a hand reach out from the darkness and literally grab my leg. I lost my footing and nearly slipped, but my hands were firmly gripping the train. I screamed and kicked, but the train sped by before I could make contact with anything. Before I could even comprehend what just happened, I felt another hand slap against my leg. I screamed again before scrambling up the ladder, hopefully out of reach. My heart was racing. What the hell just happened? The train exited the tunnel, and I hopped off without thinking. I waited for the train to completely pass and watched it chug over the bridge. I remember pacing back and forth in the little clearing, thinking about what just happened. Like, were there really people in the tunnel, and what could they possibly be doing there? Why the hell would they try to drag me down? All these thoughts and more were racing through my mind when a stark realization struck me in the face. The only way back to my car was through the tunnel. There was absolutely no chance in hell I was walking back through that tunnel with those people in there, especially since they'd be able to see my silhouette and I'd be walking through darkness. I sat on the ground for what felt like forever. There was no other option. I couldn't walk across the bridge without risking my life. A train could come along at any second, and the bridge was too long. I considered calling someone to come rescue me, but I wasn't even sure if they'd be able to do anything. Police weren't an option. I was breaking the law just being here. I had no choice. I picked up a rock and started making my way through the tunnel. There were 2 people in there, which I knew for a fact, but there could have been more. I had no idea. I got about halfway to the point where I felt the second set of hands when I heard something. A faint click was coming from somewhere in the tunnel. It sounded like a human clicking their tongue, but it could have been made by a machine. It was honestly hard to tell. I froze and thought to myself, continuing to walk this tunnel was a death sentence. I felt a rush of confidence and pulled out my phone. "You better stay back, or I'll shoot," I threatened, my words echoing off the tunnel walls. There was a moment of silence. The clicking stopped as quickly as it had begun. I was obviously bluffing about having a gun, but I figured it was better to bluff than just walk in silence. I then pulled up a video on YouTube of gunshot sound effects, turned up my phone's volume, and played it. It was honestly louder than I was expecting, and with the echo of the tunnel, I prayed to God that whoever was in there bought it. Without waiting another second, I sprinted full speed into the darkness, bracing myself for a fight. I didn't stop running until I had reached the other side. By some miracle, no one tried to grab me. After making it out of the tunnel, I looked back. There was another flash from deep in the tunnel. This time, though, it subsided long enough for me to clearly see 2 silhouettes standing on the tracks facing me. That was it for me. I turned to leave, but as I was jogging away, the nastiest screech I've ever heard emanated from the tunnel. It sounded barbaric, definitely human, but far from normal. I don't plan on ever train hopping again. I come from a small town in Pennsylvania, and I've lived here all of my life. I'm 17 years old, and the time this story took place, I was around 14 years old. My memory around this is a little hazy because I don't like to talk about it, but I figured I'd let out any dark feelings I still get by it. It may not be considered a scary story, but to me, this was probably one of the most scariest things that I've ever been through. At the time this happened, I was an 8th grader in middle school. During the time, my mom worked at Panera Bread, and she had to work very early in the morning, so me and my sister would usually take the bus to school while my dad and my little brother, who was around 4 years old at the time, would stay home. This will be important later. It was like any other ordinary day. Me and my sister would get ready and leave at around 7:20 a.m. to walk to our bus stop. We lived in an apartment complex, and we would have to walk the 3 minutes to the front of the apartment because that's where the bus would pick us up. A little background information: me and my sister would meet up with our friends at the bus stop since we lived in the same apartment complex, and we would wait until the bus showed up. I would stay at the back with my friend, while my sister and her friend would be towards the front, 5 feet from the stop. So, like our usual routine, I had met up with my friend, Reed, and my sister would meet up with her friend, who I'll call Lelia. We waited for the bus to show up. Me and Reed would always see this boy, who I'll refer to as Scott. He was a year younger than us, and he would always run across the street to our bus stop to get a seat since we would be the first to be picked up. This was because by the time the bus driver would pick him up, he'd be the last person, and there would be no seats left for him to sit at. So he began to run across the street, and we were used to seeing him run across like that. Reed and I would always laugh at the way he ran, but wouldn't pay any more attention after he made it across. This will also be important. So, as we're waiting for the bus to arrive, me and my friend were talking, and there would be 5 other kids waiting for the bus at the front of the apartments as well. And like always, we see Scott across the street, waiting for the bus to arrive. A few minutes go by, and we see the yellow bus coming towards our stop. So everyone on our side begins to gather their belongings, and we begin to form a line as the bus gets closer. It begins to blink its lights, and the stop sign starts to come out at the side, as a sign for the other cars to stop. And for just a second, I begin to see Scott running across. I don't give it two thoughts since this was normal, and I began to hear the screeching noise coming from the opposite side of the road. It was like everything was going in slow motion during those couple of seconds, and I remember hearing the screeching noise become louder and louder. As I'm picking up my head to see what the noise was, I heard a big thump noise, and what I saw next will forever remain in my mind until this day. I hear a big thump noise, and I then see Scott flying in the air. I then see Scott hitting the ground so hard, and the noise was so loud as he then made an impact to the street. I remember hearing my friend Reed then scream at the top of her lungs, and I then quickly looked at the car, and I saw the driver inside. I remember seeing the bus driver quickly taking out his walkie-talkie attached to his radio as he was then saying all these codes into it. I then see Scott running around the bus and towards where our bus stop was, and he then had his arms wrapped around his stomach, and he was bleeding all around his head. He also had these cuts on his face, and he was crying wildly. During that moment, I was so horrified that I froze, and I was so scared to say anything. The driver then came out of the car and began to panic, then sang to Scott, "Oh my God, man, I'm so sorry. I never even saw you." I was looking down for 1 second, and then it just happened. But Scott was in so much pain, then he didn't even pay attention to him. Then this kid in my sister's grade ran up to him, then sang, "Hey, man, do you need an ambulance?" Scott was just crying, then shaking his head yes. The boy then took out his phone and called 911, telling the operator everything that happened. The driver then fell to the ground, took a cell phone out, and began to call someone. He then put it on speaker, and once the person picked up and said hello, he'd been sad, "Mom," to the kid, "so sorry." And he then began to break down in tears, and he just kept repeating that same line over and over again. The driver's mother had tried to calm him down, and then the driver just said, "Please forgive me, please. And even my car, it's a friend's car." Scott just stayed on the ground, lying there, as everyone watched him. The next thing I remember was that Scott always had his mother and brother take him to the bus stop, and they would always make sure he got on, but on this day, they never went with him to the bus stop. I then began to check on my sister, making sure she was okay. Her and her friends seemed a little shaken up, but they were okay. Reed's mom and sister were running up to us, and I remember hugging them. At that moment, I felt so alone and horrified. I began to cry hysterically, and my sister was just trying to comfort me. Something that I always regret was never telling my parents right away about what happened. I didn't want to wake and worry my dad, and I didn't want to get my mom in trouble for leaving early. I knew that she suffered from anxiety, so I didn't want to give her a panic attack, which she would get every once in a while. So, my sister and I just decided to wait there. I remember calling my friend, who I'll call Kara. I remember that her and her mom worked at the school next to ours, and I began to tell her everything that happened. I began to break down. They quickly alerted the front desk, and she calmed me down, telling me everything was going to be okay. I know some of you might be thinking, how was I able to call my friend but not my parents? But during that moment, I just felt the need to call Cindy because she was who I trusted at the time, and we're still friends to this day. About 20 minutes later, the ambulance arrived. They began to check Scott and treat him while he was lying on the ground, still crying and in pain. 10 minutes passed, and I began to come at ease. They started to place him on the stretcher. I remember seeing his mom and brother running with a paramedic towards him, and they had the most worried and horrified faces that I've ever seen. I began to feel so sad for them. Reed, my sister, and I thought it would be okay if we went to school just to try and take our minds off of everything that happened and all of the horror we witnessed 40 minutes ago. We were at our bus stop for almost an hour, and we still got picked up at the next stop and then immediately went to school. I remember the staff waiting there for us and separating the apartment complex bus stop kids, escorting us to the library. I won't go into too much detail, but they pretty much stated that we could stop by the counselor's office anytime during the school day, and if we wanted to leave school, we were able to. After that event, I didn't take the bus for 4 months and was dropped off. I didn't want to cross the street, and whenever I would hear a tire screech, I would always jump and begin to get a cold sweat. A few months later, I began to feel better and continued to live a normal life. After that, Scott didn't go to school until months later, until he was finally okay, towards the end of the year. Like I said, I know this wasn't the typical stalker story, but this was one horrific event that I went through, and I never want to go through it again. But remember to stay safe out there. I really hope many people don't ever have to witness what I and the other kids had to see that day. It was truly awful. I'm a student in Rome and I live about 2 hours away from it, so whenever I have to go there, I have to go by train. I do have my driver's license, but I prefer the train because I can study on the way there. Plus, in Italy, it's quite common for students to move by train to reach the cities where we study. So, this one day in question, I was waiting at the train station in Roma Tiburtina with my boyfriend for my train to come. This is one of those times where I would get on a train by myself because he had an extra lesson the following day, so he was just keeping me company. We both noticed a weird guy with a bike acting strange, like he was drunk or something, but we didn't pay much attention because the station is often full of drunk homeless people roaming around. Here's why he never lets me go alone to the station, especially at night. So, we sat and waited for my train, and when it finally arrived, I got up, kissed my boyfriend goodbye, and got on the train. I did notice the guy with the bike standing in line behind me to get on the train, but I honestly didn't give it that much thought. After all, lots of people took my same train, and there were often drunk people trying to board without a ticket. When I got on the train, it was packed. No matter how many carriages I passed, I couldn't find a seat, so I just sighed and decided to go sit by the train door. I don't know about other countries, but here in Italy, some trains have a little seat by the door that you can unfold. So, I unfolded one of those and sat there, taking out my history book and starting my long study session. About 5 minutes into my studying, I felt something on my cheek. It was a hand. I raised my gaze from my book, and there he was, the guy with the bike. I immediately jerked his hand away from my face and asked, who are you and what do you want? He simply just stood there smiling, so I asked again, who are you? He then looked me dead in the eyes, still with that creepy grin, and said, I'm no one. I'm just a dude. Wanna have some fun? I didn't even bother answering. I just started picking up my stuff to leave, but then he put his arm right in front of me, blocking my way into the carriage. So, I grabbed his wrist, dug my nails into it, and then jerked it away, freeing my passage to the much more crowded carriage where he couldn't do anything to me. I tried to look for the ticket inspector to get some help, but he just kept following me. One very kind man noticed the creep was following me, so he offered me a seat and told me to stay there while he went to look for the inspector. I sat down and waited. I honestly thought that I was safe, that he wouldn't try to do anything in front of so many people, but I was wrong. He started going back and forth along the corridor of the carriage, and every time he passed me, he would try to touch me. He would caress my shoulder or face or even try to go to my breasts, despite the fact that I kept jerking his hands away. Everybody just watched and said nothing, absolutely nothing, to help me. After a while, the man came back with the ticket inspector and the creep ran away in the opposite direction. The inspector came up to me, and I showed him a picture of the dude that I'd managed to take, telling him that he was following me and touching me. So, the inspector went after the creep and eventually caught him a few carriages forward. He then proceeded to call the police. The police came to the next station, and while waiting, the creep was placed near his bike by the door with the inspector constantly watching him. At the train station, 2 officers had to literally lift him out of the train because he was resisting, saying that we were friends and that I obviously liked his attention. But he got arrested anyway. And the worst part of all this, no one even dared to help me on that train when he was trying to touch me in front of everyone. There was even a woman who said I must have done something to turn him on. So, even though I was just a student minding my own business, just sitting there looking at my books, in her mind, I must have done something to turn him on. Still to this day, I can't believe I was the one being blamed for his creepy behavior. Seriously, what the? This happened shortly after I turned 15 years old. As a birthday gift, my parents had given me an Xbox. I was even given my own monitor, which allowed me to play in my room. My room was upstairs, and in the weeks after my birthday, I of course spent a lot of time up there. It was a Saturday night. I was talking in an Xbox party chat with 2 of my school friends. Both of my parents went out of town at a work convention for the weekend, so I was home alone. I had my headphone volume pretty loud, but during a pause in our conversation, I heard a thumping sound come from downstairs. If you've ever been home alone as a kid, you'll know that any abnormal sound gets your mind imagining the worst. I turned down the volume and took one headphone off my ear. Nothing happened for the next 5 minutes, but shortly afterward, I heard the same noise again. I told my 2 friends about it this time, and they both encouraged me to go check it out, joking how someone might have broken in. I laughed and agreed to do it during the next break in our game. When that came, I took my headphones off and started walking towards the stairs. I began walking down them, and as I did, I began to hear soft whispering. I was only halfway down, but I completely froze up. I intently listened, trying to make out whether what I was hearing was actually real or not. Eventually, I crouched down to get a look into the living room. There, I saw 4 fully grown men, all completely covered in black, silently walking around. I genuinely couldn't process what I was seeing. All I knew is that I had to get back upstairs. I slowly started crawling back up them, and of course, one of the steps let out a loud creaking noise that echoed throughout the house before returning to silence. There was no way they didn't hear it. Thinking quick, I ran to my room, put on my headset, and told my friends to call the police to my house. They sounded confused and now in a serious tone asked what was going on. I didn't feel like I had enough time to explain, so I just told them to hurry and threw my headset down on my desk. I knew that locking myself in my room would be an obvious sign that I was inside. I still locked the door and closed it behind me, but instead, I hid in the bathroom further down the hallway with the light off and the door slightly cracked open so that they wouldn't think to check it. I could hear multiple sets of boots slowly walking up the stairs as I sat in silence. They kept getting louder until I could hear banging on my bedroom door down the hall. Not banging like trying to get my attention, Whoever was doing it was clearly trying to break down the door. Voices started yelling out, saying things like how I needed to open the door if I didn't want anything bad to happen to me. I was absolutely horrified. I got up and started desperately opening the bathroom window. I guess I'd made too much noise because a set of boots started heading down the hall just as the bathroom door fully opened. I managed to dive out of the window head first. I landed badly on my neck but still managed to look back up at the bathroom window. A silhouette stood motionless, looking back at me. That's when the backyard door slid open and 3 men came running out towards me. I tried getting up to run, but I couldn't in time. All 3 of them started grabbing me and pulling me back towards the house, but this was interrupted by the distant sound of police sirens. The 3 of them stopped and looked up at each other. They then sprinted to the backyard fence, climbed it, and I never saw them again. A few moments later, the police showed up in the backyard. I told them which way the men had gone, to which a couple of them started off in that direction while another stayed with me. The only man that was caught that night was the one inside the house. The other 3 that ran were never found. As police were asking me questions, my 2 friends who I was playing Xbox with pulled into the driveway on their bikes. Even to this day, I still routinely thank them for calling the cops, as it likely saved my life. Found left behind in the house were 4 different knives and a couple of fully loaded pistols.